Welcome back to the channel. Today we will travel through the pages of What If Issei Was Born with 4 Powers Part 6. The link to the story will be in the description below. Now let's start. 8 days passed quickly for the group of devils and the Securitate. Or, at least, for the brunette. The devils were of the opposite opinion, if somebody asked them. The training was complete for the time being, according to Issei's words, so they had a day and a half to rest their very sore muscles. The devils were made to have almost equal prowess on all of their limbs, with Kaneko having surprisingly an easy time with the training, despite the fact that she was horribly unbalanced in that department at first. Without telling them, Issei was very pleased with everyone's progress, considering the limited amount of time the group had in their hands. Yet, it showed that supernatural species could grow immensely stronger should they put their mind into it and not rely on their natural talents without finding ways to cover up any flaws on their bodies and techniques. Ria's Gremory wasn't the only one that took the message to heart, even though her contracted magician's training was more than gruesome for her and her peerage. Speaking of her peerage, the Redeed was proud of all of them and their progress, not to mention the drive each and every one had solely to help her out of her arranged marriage. Or so she wanted to think. She knew that each member of her peerage got stronger for their own purposes. And the thought hurt her way more than she was willing to admit, even silently to herself. The king of the peerage sighed lightly in emotions that were too complicated for her to describe in her exhausted state as she basked in the warmth of the water in the spacious bathtub. On her left was an almost asleep, yet smiling as usual, Akeno Himejima. Further on her right, Asia and Kaneko used the back of one another as support and looked almost asleep as well. The Redeed stood up with a mildly satisfied groan, alerting the other girls and gaining their attention. She never noticed the heavy twitches of Asia and Kaneko at the wonders her movement made to her impressive bust. Especially when she stretched. She was so focused on the satisfying pops that various parts of her body made that she missed the smaller-breasted duo exiting the bathing area with heavily dejected expressions. Akeno, on the other hand, just smiled in amusement at the scene, having paid attention to her surroundings. She also didn't miss the dejectedly quiet "it's not fair" muttering from both girls. The queen of the peerage hummed and acknowledged good night. At Ria's almost silent departure. The secret fallen angel waited for a few seconds to make sure she was alone before she started caressing her whole body, focusing on her most sensitive areas. She released quiet, needy moans as she focused on her bigger than Ria's breasts, building up tension in her abdomen and lower regions. Her right hand continued its ministrations on her chest, exchanging between right and left to maximize the effect. Sometimes, she even brought up her mammaries to suck on her nipples, like a hungry baby. Yes, Akeno was horny and wanted some release. Release from the tension that had built up throughout the training, as well as the one she made herself. So, with that in mind, her left hand traveled slowly downwards, feeling a jolt of excitement as she went past her stomach and parted her legs as much as her sore body allowed, without making her feel any kind of discomfort, while also allowing her a very easy access to her already moist crotch. Having done the act of masturbation many times in secret, the Ravenette closed her eyes and sighed in bliss as her hand went on the most sensitive part of her twat, her clit. She allowed her mind to make up scenarios that pleased her kinks, such as being found out by her best friend and king and being disciplined by a hard spanking before being made to eat her whole body out. Her imagination went crazy from there and, without her realizing it, she thought of the Securitate completely dominating her in the most shameful way possible, in front of a tied-up, pleaty-looking and horny Arias who had her lower holes filled up with vibrating toys. Then, the male of her thoughts and herself went on to dominate the king. She hadn't realized how many times she had climaxed, but Akeno felt satisfied. For now, at least. After all, her snatch was crying in agony for the release only a penis could give. So, while she exited the bathing area with a slight pep to her steps, Akeno promised to herself that she would fulfill her fantasy once Ria's had her freedom. On a side note, she didn't know that her best friend and king were of the same mind once she was at her room, albeit her imagination didn't run as wild and had more of a romantic approach. Although, Ria's had one thing in common with her queen, she imagined doing the deed with the same male. Issei Haidu. The Securitate had a quiet and relaxing bath with his friend, Yudo Kiba. The knight of the Gremory peerage grew stronger and better at his swordsmanship from the training, but it was obvious to himself that he had a very long way to go to become as good as the brunette was with swords. And, while everyone else went to relax in their rooms, Issei went outside and sat in a meditative position on a rock before wordlessly releasing his sword's true form and placed them on his lap in a crisscrossing fashion like a very uneven X. Then, he closed his eyes and, with practiced ease, he entered his inner world where he was forced to block and counterattack even before he opened his eyes. Zangetsu and Drake went at it all night long, giving Issei no time to breathe or relax. Or sleep peacefully, for that matter. Once the deadliest spar to date came to an end, the trio didn't exchange a word. They had a whole conversation with their eyes alone as his tenant stared at him and vice versa. The message was clear. He didn't need to be told good luck since he didn't need it. He was more than capable of handling someone like Razor and his peerage. So, he had to stay on alert and not be careless. Also, he would make sure to give the arrogant devil a beating that the latter would never be able to forget. Using all of his powers. Especially that one. It was the day of the raiding game and, early in the morning, the group had teleported back to the Orc, with Asia being quick to heal Issei's motion sickness, looking refreshed and confident in themselves. The latter included Kaneko, although it was very hard to see it since she was perpetually expressionless. The Kendo didn't miss a bit and made a batch of her exquisite tea, enough for everyone to have a second serving, or even a third. She also used her magic to quickly bake some cookies, a plate solely dedicated to the Rook, while another was for everyone else. Once everything was served, everyone relaxed on their seats, Kaneko and Yudo on the opposite couch of Asia and Issei. Akeno, as usual, stood beside Rias, who was sitting on her comfortable chair behind her desk. Suddenly, a magic circle appeared on the inside and in front of the double doors, but nobody was alert. Out of it came Grafia, wearing her usual stoic mask of professionalism. "Good morning, Rias Oju-sama, everyone." She greeted with a respectful bow of her head. The fact that nobody was alerted didn't mean they weren't surprised by her visit. Grafia Rias blinked in visible surprise before she recomposed herself and returned the greeting, albeit without the bow. "Good morning to you too." Her peerage, sans Issei, gave their good morning-s as well. "What are you doing here so early?" Rias asked curiously, once the pleasantries were out of the way. The maid's posture and gaze relaxed. Enough so that she surprised everyone with a soft smile that appeared on her lips. "I came to talk to you about the raiding game and something that was proposed by Razor Phoenix himself." Grafia replied calmly. Rias withheld a grimace at the mere mention of her fiancé's name. "What did he say?" she said more than asked through gritted teeth. Grafia's smile widened a very small, yet noticeable margin, making it look almost mischievous in nature. "He said that you could have your raiding game in a replica of your educational grounds, Akakuo Academy." The revelation caused Rias and Akeno to widen their eyes in surprise and a small bit of disbelief, with Yudo and Asia following right after. Issei and Kaneko just raised their eyebrows in indifference, their mind almost not comprehending Razor's arrogance. It was obvious that the Phoenician was heavily underestimating Rias, while also greatly overestimating himself with his proposal. Essentially, he wanted to beat the Redite in what was assumed her home area in order for his win to appear that much more overwhelming and humiliating. The group didn't say anything to that because the Sekiryu had taught them, among other things, that actions always spoke louder than words alone. For the king of the peerage, it was hard to suppress her excitement-induced trembling. She could show off to her contracted magician and gain some of his attention and get rid of Razor in one fell swoop. So, with a confident smile and a matching posture as she stood up, "Then, I accept." Rias responded. "Very well." Grafia said back calmly, inwardly taking note of how calm and collected everyone in the room seemed to be. Especially the sole brunette in the room, who hadn't even given her a single glance. Something that infuriated the strongest queen, but had to swallow the pill and not comment on his rudeness. That is, until he spoke up, even with his eyes closed. The question. Issei's calm, yet firm voice earned everyone's attention. "What is it, Haidu-sama?" Grafia forced herself to be polite towards him, her tone returning to its usual stoicism as she addressed him. Then, he opened his eyes and looked at her, and the maid had to suppress a shiver down her spine at the intensity in which he stared. Even though he seemed calm, it felt like he was reading her whole being with his gaze alone. A feeling she decidedly didn't like from anyone, not even her husband. "Who's gonna watch the raiding game?" His nonchalant question was met with equal amounts of confusion and, once everyone looked at her, anticipation of her answer. For a moment, Grafia considered not telling them. Partly because of her admittedly unreasonable spite with her charge's contracted magician, partly because she just didn't want to. However, she knew that the information would be revealed, regardless of the raiding game's outcome. Also, she wanted the brunette's gaze to stop looking at her as if her entire soul was exposed, so she decided to spill the beans. The heads of the Phoenix and Gremory households and their wives, if the latter so choose, myself as the arbiter and Mao Lucifer himself. The latter brought a gasp of surprise by everyone except Issei, who slightly narrowed his eyes in suspicion. Grafia fought the urge to avert her eyes away from the brunettes. "Also, there will be 3 guests." She continued stoically, earning a raised eyebrow from Issei, whose suspicion didn't lessen in the slightest. Rias, however, was more vocal about her confusion once she regained her momentarily lost composure. "So, Ani-sama will be watching as well." She muttered in thoughtfulness before she smiled resolutely for a mere second but didn't say anything else for that particular detail. "So, who are going to be the 3 guests you mentioned, Grafia?" she asked curiously. The maid didn't show it, but she was glad that she was forced to focus on the redeed. Yet, the feeling from before didn't disappear, only lessened in intensity, meaning that the brunette boy was still looking at her. You know all three of them quite well. In fact, two of them are your classmates, Ria's. Her explanation made it easy for everyone to deduce that Sona and Tsubaki were the ones mentioned. Then, what about the third, Grafia-san? Surprisingly, it was Asia that voiced everyone's question, albeit shyly. Grafia took in a small breath and closed her eyes, before opening them and looking at the one she didn't even want to. It will be the fallen angel Rainer, the one that lives with Argento-san and, more importantly, Haidao-san. She replied stoically to hide her annoyance at the fact that this person was invited by her husband. Behind her back to boot. Let it be known that, once the strongest queen was informed of this, her husband's ears hurt for 3 whole days, and she spent equal nights to vent her frustration via sexual intercourse with said person, making him both glad at the fact as well as crying manly tears from the pain of not being able to properly ejaculate after several rounds. She was tempted to repeat the process twice over once this whole situation between the Phoenix and Gremory households was resolved. Alas, she loved him too much to hurt him like that again. While he was peacefully doing his paperwork, Serzich's Lucifer felt the need to both shudder in fear and sigh in relief at the same time. He didn't know why, but his mind told him that he was lucky enough to dodge a bullet that could potentially leave him without a penis for a whole month. So, in the end, he couldn't help but sigh in relief before he continued on his paperwork, not even risking his ears after he had relayed to his wife that a particular someone would attend the unofficial rating game between his adorable little sister and the disgusting pig of her fiancé. How much time do we have until the rating game, Grafia? Riaz asked seriously, sitting back down on her chair with her arms crossed under her bust. The maid spared a glance at the clock on the wall to her right before she spoke. It's midnight tonight, Riaz. In other words, you have more than 12 hours to rest and prepare properly for your rating game. She responded calmly. I see. Riaz sighed lightly in relief at hearing that before she looked at her peerage and contracted magician. The peerage members gazed back at her with calm confidence, with Asia being a little shy as always. The brunette, on the other hand, was just calm. In fact, now that the redeed thought about it, he was too calm. Like the times he almost went overboard with his actions, like that time at the abandoned church against Donosik. She didn't know if she liked this side of Issei Haidu, but it was one that would ensure a victory against Razor and his peerage. Ria's and Issei's gazes were locked for longer than it was comfortable for the others, as if a weird tension had risen between the two. Then, as if communicating with their gazes alone, Issei nodded subtly, with a redeed following afterwards, before the latter looked at Grafia. Thank you for telling us, Grafia. You may go. She said seriously. The maid took the hint of the dismissal and bowed her head respectfully, returning to her role as a maid for both the Mao Lucifer and the head maid for the Gremory household before she left the same way she came, via teleportation circle. Now, Ria started seriously as she stood up, prompting the rest to do the same. We'll talk about our strategy for the rating game. We'll cover all the possible scenarios on how Razor will act and do our best to blow him and his peerage away. Decisively. She announced in the same tone, with her last word being emphasized through gritted teeth. Yes, Riaz, but you. Akeno, Asia, Kaneko and Yudo echoed in equal amounts of seriousness and excitement. Issei just nodded his head in agreement. Riaz magically produced a map of the whole Kuo Academy campus on her desk and everyone gathered around to start their planning. So, Riaz looked at the brunette seriously, earning his attention. If it's alright with you, Ice, I need your help in strategizing. Then, tell me all you know about Rayler and his peerage. Was his calm response. Ria's smile was sweet as it was malicious. She wasn't just confident. She was sure that they would win. On a side note, nobody commented on or bothered to correct him by mistaking Razor's name. That said, it didn't mean it wasn't amusing if anyone took into account almost everyone's amused giggles for the girls and chuckles for Yudo and Issei himself. Kaneko's lips just twitched up in a small smile, indicating she was amused as well. Since they had the time, Riaz would make sure that their strategy would be flawless and, if possible, to not lose anyone from her peerage, especially Asia, who was their healer. Also, she would never tell anyone, especially Issei, that she planned to face Razor herself, with Asia as support, once things got heated. She just hoped that the Securitate wouldn't be too mad at her afterwards. Night came quite quickly for the members of the Orc. Yet, Riaz felt like she and her entourage could face whatever Razor would throw at them and, hopefully, come out unscathed. The Redeed was adamant on one thing for the rating game as soon as the planning had commenced. Since the people who would watch this unofficial rating game were very few but equally important, the group was compelled to make this a show worth remembering for 2 reasons. To show Ria's parents and brother that she had grown enough to be independent and make her own choices, as well as the fact that she had taken the time to prepare herself and her peerage and her contracted magician for this match to the best of her ability. Nobody corrected her that Issei Haidu was the one that tried his best to make them ready in less than 10 days. Not even the brunette himself. Because, if something minor like that was necessary to make Ria's family and, by extension, the devils to realize their flawed view on things like arranged marriages, then the brunette didn't mind his accomplishment to be given credit on Ria's. The group was sitting in their usual seats at the clubroom, with Akeno being the only one standing beside Ria's. The brunette beauty had served tea for everyone, as was the usual, in order to calm their nerves for the upcoming match against Razor. Truth be told, though, Asia was the only anxious person in the room. Issei radiated calm and confidence, which seemed to pass on Ria's and the rest of the peerage. Ria's and Kaneko were the only ones that saw Issei's calm as not necessarily a good sign, considering his actions the night that the retreat added Asia in her peerage. Akeno and Yudo didn't mind his demeanor for one reason: if it meant that they would defeat Razor easier and free their king, then everything went. Which meant that their trainer's brutality was more than welcome in this particular instance. Speaking of said trainer, he was taught how to make a pocket dimension for his own purposes, like hiding his sword or carry anything he wanted in secret and have it on his person at a moment's notice. Something that he picked up quite easily. Then, he was promised that, after this situation, Ria's and Akeno would teach him and Asia on creating and sustaining barriers. As for what he taught everyone, it wasn't much. Kaneko and Yudo focused on their physical traits, but their trainer forced them to always expect the unexpected during a fight, no matter if it's just a spar or a fight to the death. Akeno, Asia and Ria's, while their bodies got stronger, they focused on their magic and their control on it, since hand-to-hand combat wasn't a subject that could be easily picked up on. Especially in Asia's case, considering she couldn't hurt a fly even at her worst. Their reminiscing was cut off when the double doors were firmly knocked thrice. Enter. Ria's responded almost mechanically, albeit elegantly and sternly at the same time, with her mind preoccupied with the raiding game. The group minus Issei, who didn't even glance at the door's direction, was pleasantly surprised at the people who entered. "Hello, Sona, Tsubaki." Ria's greeted them formally with a smile, glad that the arrival of her friend took her mind away from her thoughts. "Hello, Ria's, everyone." Sona greeted back stoically with a small bow of her head, her eyes looking around the room and lingering on the seemingly uncaring Issei for a moment longer. She suppressed the urge to feel saddened at his lack of reaction. Tsubaki just bowed her head respectfully, but offered no words of greeting. After her peerage greeted the Citri heiress back formally, including Asia, Ria's spoke again. "To what do we owe the pleasure of your visit, Sona?" she questioned, a small amount of curiosity evident in both her tone and expression. "I wish my childhood friend and rival good luck on her first raiding game, even though it's unofficial, of course. After all, the outcome of this match decides your freedom from Razor." Sona replied stoically, although her eyes and small smile spoke volumes of her sincerity. Ria's didn't show it, but she was touched by her friend's words. "Thank you, Sona," she said in a slightly emotional tone, her own smile widening a fraction. A small comfortable silence followed, with everyone but Issei smiling at the interaction between the two kings. The silence was slightly disturbed when a magic circle with a Gremory crest appeared behind the couch Issei and Asia occupied. Only the brunette didn't turn at the new arrival, silently enjoying Akeno's tea. No one was surprised that Grafia emerged from the magic circle, clad in her usual maid outfit, as well as wearing an expressionless mask of professionalism. "Good evening, Ria's Gremory-sama, Citri-sama and everyone else." The maid greeted formally, complete with a respectful bow of her head. "Good evening to you too, Grafia." Ria's greeted back in the same manner, inwardly exasperated with her sister-in-law's antics when the latter was on duty. Sona, Tsubaki, Kaneko and Issei didn't offer a verbal response, unlike the rest. However, the three girls nodded their heads in greeting. The brunette just continued sipping his tea. Ria suppressed a long-suffering sigh at her contracted magician's behavior towards her childhood friend and her brother's wife. She would have to talk to him at a later time why he acted so coldly towards them. "The raiding game will commence in half an hour, Ria-sama," Grafia announced formally. "Oh." Ria's blinked in mild surprise before she glanced at the clubroom's clock. True to the maid's words, there was half an hour to midnight. "So, it's almost time." She muttered seriously with her eyes narrowing in determination, her voice easily heard by everyone in the room. "I'll be taking my leave, then, Ria's," Sona said stoically, earning the retreat's attention. "I'll be rooting for you from the watch room." "Thank you, again, Sona." Ria showed her appreciation via a grateful smile towards her longtime friend. Sona just nodded in acknowledgement before she and Tsubaki bowed and exited the room. "By the way, Grafia-san," Akeno spoke politely, earning the maid's attention. "Who decided to watch this match?" she asked curiously, voicing the question everyone in the room had. It was at this moment that Issei turned his head to look at the maid. Said maid felt like bolting out of the room from his intense piercing gaze. Alas, as a proud and strong devil that had survived a gruesome war, she was compelled to endure this much. The heads of both households along with their wives, Mao Lucifer, Citri Sama and her queen, and, finally, the fallen angel Rainer. Although, the latter seems to be really reluctant to do so, from what I was told by Lucifer Sama. She answered honestly. Understandable. Ria sighed lightly in understanding. Being in the same room with high-ranking devils, especially Ani Sama, who is a Mao, would make anyone feel uncomfortable. Lucifer Sama has ensured her safety, and even Citri Sama volunteered to do so. Graphia's stoic announcement surprised everyone in the room. Especially Issei, who managed to show no reaction to this bit of information. He masked his surprise and suspicion under the guise that he simply returned to sipping his tea. Even though Graphia didn't show it, she was extremely glad that those dark green eyes were off of her. I see. Ria said in an unreadable tone and matching facial expression to mask her irritation that Sona was obviously trying to get her contracted magician's attention. Why were there so many women that tried to get what was rightfully hers? Asia and obviously Rainer were enough of a competition as they were. Now Sona as well. What was next? Some girl from Issei's past appearing out of nowhere and taking all of his focus, or even Akeno showing interest in him just because the latter liked to tease her. Or, even worse, Kaneko breaking from her shell because of Issei and getting attached to him. Even more scenarios ran through Ria's mind, and all of them made her feel both irritated and frustrated. It was a good thing, all things considered. After all, she could vent all of these feelings on Razor, and it would feel cathartic. Ria's didn't know it, but she was so close to her predictions that, if she did know, she would try to become hairless out of her own frustration. Or, more likely, due to her competitive spirit, she would try even harder to get Issei's attention only on herself. Kaneko sent a suspicious glance at her king, feeling like calling her an idiot for some reason. She dismissed the feeling, but her gut told her that it had something to do with whom she believed was the most powerful person she had ever encountered, Issei Haidu. Without anyone noticing, the time reached midnight and a big silver magic circle appeared in the center of the room. Everyone, please, enter the magic circle. Graphia said formally. The devils and Issei did as told, with Asia's hands already glowing behind the brunette's back as they vanished from sight. Something that the maid found both curious and suspicious, but shook her head to focus on the task at hand. She used her own magic circle to transport at the watchroom, from where she would act as the arbiter of the match. The group of 6 opened their eyes to the familiar side of their clubroom. Asia blinked in confusion, while Issei discreetly sniffed the air and immediately could tell that they were in a fake world of sorts. The blonde Italian followed her love interest to the window, where they looked up and around, noticing that only the sky was different from the real world. Everything else was completely the same appearance-wise. While Asia marveled at the sight, Issei was astounded that the devils wasted so much power to create dimensions like this one just to entertain themselves. Or, like this particular case, solve all kinds of disputes. Everyone. At Ria's call, the group gathered around the desk, where there was a map of the entire Kuo Academy campus. However, their attention was on the Redeed's outstretched right hand, which contained 6 red ball-like things, small enough to be almost considered beans. Take one of these and put them in your ears. Even if Ria's voice was stern, she somehow made it sound kind as well. Taking the lead, the Redeed demonstrated how to do so, the others following her without any signs of discomfort or doubt. What are these, Ria's Wani-sama? Asia asked cutely in confused wonder. Communication devices, Asia-chan. Strangely enough, it was Issei who answered her calmly, pleasantly surprising the rest with his knowledge. How did you know, Ice-kun? Yudo asked curiously. Just a guess, since we'll be away from each other throughout the campus. The brunette replied in almost a deadpan. Oh. Any further discussion was put on hold as a loud, familiar voice was heard throughout the fake Kuo Academy. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Graphia Lucifuge, and I will be the arbiter of the unofficial rating game between Razor Phoenix-sama and Ria's Gremory-sama. After consulting both parties, the match will take place at a replica of Kuo Academy, the place where Ria's Gremory-sama uses as a base and an education facility. Razor Phoenix-sama will use the student council office in the new building as his base, while Ria's Gremory-sama's base will be the occult research club room in the old school building. Both parties are given a 30-minute window to discuss their strategy and are not allowed to engage in battle in that time frame. The pawns are only allowed to use promotion when they enter the enemy base. There is no time limit for the match, and both parties can cause as much damage as they want in the dimension. That is all. With that said, the 30-minute window starts now. Hearing this announcement, Ria's felt like sighing in relief that there were basically no restrictions for her and her peerage. probably because it was her first rating game. In a kinda twisted point of view, she was allowed so much leeway because she was the underdog against an experienced fighter in rating games, Razor. Also, from their last encounter, it was obvious that he underestimated Riaz and her group, but he didn't seem like the type of person to hold back just to give her a false sense of security. "Alright, everyone," Riaz said firmly, getting out of her own thoughts and earning the attention. "We'll do just as we planned earlier. Akeno, Kaneko and Yudo, use your familiars to put some traps and illusions around our base and in the surrounding forest. When you're all done, Issei will join Kaneko to take over the gym. Akeno will stay in the air and on the lookout for Razor's queen. Udo will remain outside and around the base and take care of possible threats, probably pawns, that Razor will send our way, while me and Asia will remain here in the clubroom. Afterwards, you four will regroup just outside of the track and field area, and we'll see from there." She explained hurriedly due to their time limit, albeit seriously. "Yes, but you," four people echoed energetically, Akeno, Asia, Kaneko and Udo. Upon feeling Ria's eyes on him, since he was the only one silent, Issei gave her an affirming nod of his head. "Good." Ria sighed in relief before she took a seat. "Now, go. Time is of the essence and we need everything we have to win this," she declared strongly. With determined nods, although Akeno was smiling serenely as usual, the trio went out to do their tasks. Rainer couldn't feel more awkward, even if she tried. She was invited to watch the rating game by the Mao Lucifer himself and would be amongst other high-ranking devils as well. To top it all off, she was guarded by Sona Citri and her queen, both devils. The fallen angel being protected by devils. If she believed in the God of the Bible, she would ask him what on earth was going on. On a side note, none of the devils in the watchroom, which was the student council office, seemed to be bothered by her presence. Probably because I'm still weak compared to each one of them, she couldn't help but think bitterly to herself. Her training with Penemu was an eye-opening and humbling experience for Rainer. It served to understand how much of a long way she had to become strong enough to fend for herself. An experience that she wanted absolutely no one to know about. Especially her love interest, Issei Haidu. It was for all these reasons that she stubbornly kept her stoic gaze on the magical screens that showed various sections of Kuo Academy, where members of both peerages did their own thing until the match would officially start. Of course, her eyes every so often went to the calmly sitting on the couch Issei, who seemed to be almost asleep. The only indication he wasn't asleep was the fact that he occasionally sipped from his tea and, curiously enough, his ears slight twitches every now and then. She ignored the lively chatter between the Mao Lucifer and the parents of both kings. All she wished for was that this rating game would end as quickly as possible so that she can go back home and return to her daily routine, albeit with time to train, while also spend time with her beloved Ice-kun and the girl she now had a very soft spot in her heart, Asia-chan. On a totally unrelated note, she planned to reward her caretaker for his kindness for reasons that will be explained sometime later. Her musings were cut off when Grafia made the heavily anticipated announcement and her heart skipped a beat when she saw how sharp Issei's dark green eyes were when it was made. The rating game between Razor Phoenix-sama and Ria's Gremory-sama is now beginning. At Grafia's announcement, Issei's gaze turned extremely sharp as he opened his eyes, getting out of his relaxation. He either didn't notice or didn't care that it sent shivers down Ria's and Asia's spines. More so when he stood up and looked intently at the redeed. Also, without the three of them knowing, a few more people felt the same way as the two girls in the orc. Both at the viewing area and on the battlefield. The king of the Gremory peerage managed to keep her gaze calm and steady as the two were in a silent stare-off, seemingly having a secret conversation with their eyes alone. "Oh, Ice." Ria spoke seriously, mentally cheering that she didn't stutter before her expression and tone softened to her widely known kindness. "Please, keep Kaneko safe and help us win this." Her pleading, accompanied with a slight bow of her head, made him soften up as well, averting his piercing eyes towards the window to the left of the clubroom. He hadn't had a conversation with Aridit about Rainer throughout these 10 days. And, truth be told, he held a slight grudge towards Riaz for her rejection on the matter of Rainer joining the peerage, should the female fallen angel accept of course. So, knowing that this wasn't the time for a talk such as this, the brunette decided to put this whole matter at the back of his mind and focus on the task at hand, defeat the arrogant Phoenix. And, as a side project for Issei himself, do it in the most humiliating way possible. The same couldn't be said for Razor's peerage, though. Whatever was going to happen in the rating game would be due to both kings' orders, so he couldn't judge the servants that simply followed orders. That said, Issei and his tenants agreed on the fact that devil servants should have a bit more freedom, like the ones they had seen from Riaz and Sona. The brunette returned his dark green eyes to the redeeds, now greatly anticipating and practically begging gaze to hear his answer. Both had seemingly forgotten about the slightly scared and greatly confused Asia, who watched the interaction with her wide, innocent green eyes. He breathed a light sigh and felt some of the tension leave his body as he spoke. "Don't worry, Riaz. Everything's gonna be fine," he said calmly, almost reassuringly. The Redeed's heart skipped a beat at the fact that he called her by her first name and didn't add the "san" suffix after almost 2 weeks of his cold attitude towards her. However, she didn't dare to show her happiness over this. Yet. "Thank you, Ice." Riaz, instead, smiled softly at him, her blue eyes showing how grateful she was. Involuntarily, Issei gave a soft smile of his own. Riaz was too cute and beautiful at this moment and almost melted his heart. Asia pouted cutely, tears instantly pooling at the corners of her eyes, getting the brunette's attention. Again, in the same involuntary fashion, Issei's smile widened at the ex-nun's cuteness. He silently patted her head and took his leave to meet up with Kaneko, without saying another word. So, he missed Asia's dangerously blushing face and Ria's childish pout, with the Redeed feeling jealous of her bishop. "Even I want to be petted like that," Riaz thought wishfully, disappointed that she wasn't given the same treatment as her bishop before she shook her head to clear it. Now wasn't the time to have such thoughts. Whatever romance could bloom between herself and her contracted magician would come after Razor was dealt with. So, she put her hope on her servants and Issei to get rid most, if not all, of Razor's peerage before she faced him herself. Hopefully, Issei wouldn't be too mad that she would do so behind everyone's back, with Asia to support her to boot. "Asia." At Ria's sudden and serious call, the blonde blinked in surprise and sat up straighter on the couch. After a squeaked yes, Ria's one Isama. From the Italian girl, the Redeed explained her plan about the two of them facing Razor. At the end of her explanation, it was clear that Asia was uneasy, but ultimately nodded her consent. "Thanks, Asia-chan." Riaz muttered gratefully, her smile widening at the sight of her blushing, stuttering bishop. Issei had caught up with Kaneko outside of the gym and, without showing it, his mood had taken a great dive. So much so that he was tempted to unleash a portion of his power and run amok in the dimension to vent his frustration. The reason for that was pretty simple. Since this was a serious fight, he allowed his senses to be at their normal state. Meaning that he could hear all conversations and pinpoint everybody's location with his sense of smell. Even at the distance everyone else was, he could hear their heartbeats. So, it made sense that he heard Ria's plan. "Ignore her plan, partner." Drake suddenly spoke up calmly in his mind, almost giving him a heart attack. "Keep all these feelings bottled up. It'll feel greatly more liberating when you unleash them towards that devil who thinks he's immortal like a phoenix. Also, you can just punish her with more training after this farce is over and done with." Zangetsu supplied nonchalantly. "That's a pretty good idea." The brunette readily agreed. "Or, you can bang her to oblivion." The sword spirit suggested in the same manner. "Not this again," Issei mentally groaned in exasperation. "Why not?" Zangetsu asked, genuinely curious. Red seems like the type to need a good spankin' before fucking her brains out. Plus, I think she likes you a great deal. Like the ex-nun and the fallen at your house." He added in the same nonchalant manner as an afterthought. Issei almost stopped walking beside Kaneko at that, feeling mildly surprised and aroused at the thought of dominating Riaz like a bad-behaving schoolgirl that needed discipline. "Damn it. Don't put thoughts in my head." He mentally shouted in a slightly flustered manner at the sword spirit. "Now's not the time for that." "Partner is right." Drake seemingly agreed with the brunette as he spoke to his roommate, making said person almost sigh in relief at that. Let him vent his bottled-up frustrations first. After that, he can fuck every single one of the girls he likes. He added calmly. "Not you too." Issei mentally shouted in embarrassment, suppressing a blush from forming on his face as Zangetsu laughed his ass off at his reaction. The brunette forcefully cut off the mental communication with the two spirits, his face showing mild signs of irritation and a faint dust of pink on his cheeks. Something that Kaneko noticed but decided not to comment on, lest an argument start between them. So, she decided to focus on the match. Speaking of, the duo reached the double doors of the gym. Issei shook his head to clear it before he took a sniff to confirm what he had sensed earlier. It was enough to tell him the location of everyone in the battlefield. "Ria's got a spot on as to how Rainer would act," he said calmly. "It's Razor." Kaneko corrected him emotionlessly before turning her head to look at him. She almost sweat-dropped at how unrepentant he seemed for mistaking the Phoenix Devil's name. In her mind, at that moment, she thought that he did that on purpose. Mind you, she wasn't wrong. "How many, Issei-senpai?" Kaneko asked emotionlessly. "4 inside the gym. 1 in the air, just outside of Akeno-san's range and close to here. 3 towards Udo's location, a little ways away from the base. The rest wait for us at the track and field while Rayler is at his base." He answered calmly. This time, Kaneko didn't bother correcting him. He just confirmed her suspicion that he mispronounced Razor's name on purpose. That said, she was genuinely impressed at how sharp and accurate his senses were. Good work, Issei-senpai. Even though she praised him, her emotionless tone made it seem like she didn't care at all or that she was mocking him, which wasn't the case in the slightest. Issei just waved her off with a hand motion, as if to say, think nothing of it. Do the honors, Kaneko-san. The brunette said calmly, nodding his head to the doors. Kaneko's lips twitched slightly upwards in a faint smile of amusement at his thought of an entrance. She figured that the four inside were waiting for them, so it was practically pointless to enter silently and sneak their way towards them. The petite girl kicked the doors off the hinges with a nonchalant raise of her left leg, like she was kicking a ball high in the sky. Understandably, the four inside were startled at the flashy way the white-haired girl and brunette entered the gym. Welcome, servants of Ria's Gremory. The taller of the four girls, that stood behind the other three, and a perfect imitation of Chun-Li said nonchalantly with her arms crossed under her impressive bust, her lips forming an arrogant and superior smirk at the sight of only two people. I'm Ria's contracted magician, not her servant. Issei was quick to correct her, making Razor's servants blink in surprise, before they burst out laughing. Ha 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 ha. The girl from before laughed. You mean, you're just a human? Yeah. He replied nonchalantly, unbothered by her mocking attitude, before he raised his right hand to chest level on his right and, after a brief flash of light, his sword was in his hand. Seeing this, Razor's servant stopped laughing, feeling strange and not in a good way at the sight of his sword. On a side note, the four girls from Razor's peerage were internally baffled at how calm and collected the brunette was in the presence of four devils, with the possibility of fighting even more of their kind. What are we facing, Kaneko-san? Issei asked calmly. Based on their power, 3 pawns and a rook. The white-haired girl replied stoically, before she cracked her knuckles in a nonchalant manner. As if they were of the same mind, Issei and Kaneko turned to look at one another. Who do you want, Kaneko-san? Issei asked, still calm. A rook. She replied shortly. Okay. He nodded his consent. After all, despite her size, Kaneko was way stronger than she looked. The training he had put everyone, including himself, through just made them stronger. Don't ignore us. The four devils shouted in anger at the duo's attitude. However, when Issei's and Kaneko's attention turned to them, they visibly shuddered at how sharp the brunette's gaze was. Immediately, 2 of Razor's pawns brought out their chainsaws and turned them on, making Issei blink in surprise that 2 girls seemingly younger than Kaneko were given weapons such as these. What was Razor thinking when he gave them chainsaws? He couldn't help but wonder. The tension in the gym rose highly and, just before it reached its peak, a surprising announcement was made. 3 pawns from Razor Phoenix-sama's side retired. That seemed to be the trigger for the 4 devils as they went on the offensive quite aggressively, influenced by their anger at the loss of their comrades. Good job, Yudo. Issei thought pleasantly as the twins with the chainsaws came at him with the intent to cut him in half, shouting, disassembling time in unison. Kaneko had jumped away from him to give each other space for their fights, with Razor's rook leaping towards her, as if accepting her challenge between rooks. One of Razor's pawns stayed a few paces behind and, with a wooden stick in hand, she started gathering demonic power in order to unleash it towards the only human in the room. But I can't have you outdoing me. Issei finished his previous thought. Cleave the moon in half, Zangetsu. He said the release phrase of his sword. At his command, the whole battlefield shivered, even without being in hearing range. It only took a brief flash of pitch black, ethereal blue and blood red on his whole form to reveal his 2 swords. The twins with the chainsaws had too much momentum to stop their advance at the sight of his admittedly scary-looking swords. When they reached him with a desperate-sounding war cry, they were more than shocked at what happened. But the nonchalant swing of each sword on either side of his person, Issei cleanly cut through the chainsaws, shocking every girl in the gym that wasn't Kaneko. Who is this boy? Lord Phoenix asked in an unreadable tone as he looked at the screen that showed what happened in the gym, before he turned to look at the highest-ranking person in the room. Do you know, Lucifer-sama? Surzich's had an equally unreadable expression as he answered. His name is Issei Haidu and is my little sister's contracted magician. In other words, a simple human. However, I was informed that he's a sacred gear possessor, but never knew he was a sword wielder. Not even the fact that he owned a sword, for that matter. Grafia felt like facepalming. She had forgotten to tell her husband about the young man's sword. However, she had to focus on the screens and keep being the arbiter. I see. Lord Phoenix sighed, feeling the genuinity of his superior's words. Off to the side, 2 devils and a fallen angel were glad that they weren't questioned about this fact, allowing them to watch the match in silence. Hopefully, Riaz and Sona would get off with a light punishment for their blunder after the raiding game was over. Issei and Kaneko made quick work of Razor's pawns and rook respectively before leaving the gym in the same nonchalant manner they entered earlier. 3 pawns and 1 rook from Razor Phoenix-sama retired. Grafia's stoic announcement echoed throughout the battlefield. And, as if on cue, Ria's warm and pleased voice entered the duo's heads via the communication earplugs. "Good work, you two." "Thanks but you." Kaneko answered for the two of them, hiding her own satisfaction and a mild embarrassment at the praise behind her usual emotionless facade. Similar praises came from Akeno, Yudo and even a timid one from Asia. "You did a pretty good job yourself, Yudo. Don't undersell your own accomplishment." Issei spoke up in a mixture of seriousness and kindness. There was a small, uncomfortable silence. Everyone figured that the night of the peerage was most probably too embarrassed to form a proper reply. "Thanks, Ice-kun." Even though it sounded calm, everyone was sure that Yudo put up a calm front when he spoke. "Okay. Now that the pleasantries are over," Issei spoke seriously, bringing everyone down from the minor accomplishment. After all, even after their small victory, Razor still had more people than them. He knew that he could defeat everyone in the battlefield effortlessly, but this wasn't about him to show off. "We need to regroup. Don't waste your energy unnecessarily in order to show off." His words had the desired effect and the mood turned completely serious. "You're right, Ice." Ria spoke up seriously, taking the lead as the king of the peerage. "Akeno, find Razor's queen and take her out. Yudo, meet up with Ice and Kaneko at their location and head to the track and field," she ordered. "Yes but you," was the response from the aforementioned duo, Akeno and Yudo. "There's no need for Akeno-san to look for Razor's queen." Issei spoke, bringing confusion all over. Somehow sensing that, he continued. "She's just outside of Akeno-san sensing range right above me and Kaneko-san, ready to attack us." At the end of his explanation, he nonchalantly pointed upwards. Before an outburst of shock and surprise could come from everyone, including Kaneko from beside him, a magic sigil appeared underneath the two. Kaneko was too surprised and felt completely helpless. She closed her eyes in preparation for the sure-to-come pain before she felt a light shove on her right shoulder, sending her away. Boom. The explosion that followed was a relatively big one, the shockwave of which sent the petite girl a little farther away. She crashed on a tree, but her very strong defense as a rook prevented her from getting hurt. Instead, she was just surprised that she had survived the almost instantaneous blast, with only her ears slightly ringing from the noise due to her very close proximity. "Ice. Kaneko. Are you alright?" Ria's worried shout reached her ears. "I'm fine, but you?" Kaneko answered in her normal tone, much to the relief of everyone, waiting for the dust cloud that had formed where she and Issei previously were standing to dissipate. Probably Issei-senpai as well, considering what he's capable of. A sigh of immense relief was heard from Ria's. "Don't scare me like that again." "Not my intention." Kaneko deadpanned, choosing to ignore Akeno's amused giggles and Yudo's equally entertained chuckles. That said, I believe Issei-senpai waits for his ears to stop ringing in order to make a move. Right after she said that, her eyes widened in utter shock and pure disbelief at what she was seeing at the slowly dissipating dust cloud, and her breathing stopped for a moment. Not to mention the feeling she was getting from the person inside it. It gave her the chills. It was like she was in the presence of the vilest and most bloodthirsty demon alive. Slowly, agonizingly slowly for Kaneko, the figure inside the dust cloud was revealed and made her blood run cold in her whole body, while she shivered uncontrollably and her eyes matched her body. Issei's form was the same as before the attack from Razor's queen, but with a noticeable and scary change. A thin, jagged white horn was seen at the left of his head, pointing forward and slightly upwards, and its pointy end looked sharp enough to pierce through several inches of solid concrete. His clothes were heavily tattered and flowed in the almost non-existent wind, giving him a terrifyingly menacing vibe. The air was suddenly filled with tension. "Kaneko." Ria's voice was strained as she spoke, and the petite girl almost missed it due to her terrified state. "What's going on?" Kaneko's extremely nervous gulp was heard through the earpiece before she spoke shakily and in an obviously scared tone. "Ria's butchui, everyone UW won't believe what I'm seeing." "What is it, Kaneko-chan?" Yudo asked worriedly, voicing everyone's question. Another gulp. "It's Issei-senpai." "What is it, Kaneko-chan?" This time, it was Akeno who asked, repeating Yudo's question in an equally worried and serious voice. Her third gulp made everyone worry even more. However, they never expected her next words, just as Issei's form was revealed for everyone to see. If his dust-concealed form had the previous effect on her, his unobstructed one made her want to disappear in a secluded place and stay there crying her heart out of fear for a very long time. Yet, strangely enough, despite the feeling she was getting due to the close proximity, she somehow knew that he wouldn't hurt her. That, though, didn't mean it made her feel less horrified. There was a beat of heavy silence that followed her words, filled with worry and confusion, but nobody dared to break it. It's like he's turned into a demon. Shock, disbelief, wonder, curiosity, and a little bit of fear. All these emotions were visible on the faces of all people that could see Ria's Grimory's contracted magician. Aside from two individuals, everyone else couldn't stop a gasp filled with the same emotions escaping from their mouths. Serzich's Lucifer was the only one compassed enough to not feel any fear and was quick to narrow his eyes in suspicion. A brief glance at his wife showed him that she had no idea of this as well. On a side note, GreekfanFT managed to hold back her own gasp by sheer willpower. As the strongest queen in the underworld and currently the arbiter of a rating game with serious consequences even if unofficial for the loser, she couldn't lose face. Especially since the most important members of both families, not to mention her husband, were present. Turning to look at the younger group, Serzich's suspicion grew by a small margin. It seemed that Sona, Tsubaki and the fallen angel girl, Rainer, were mostly aware of Issei Haidu's abilities, like Ria's peerage. However, the brunette's transformation was a shock for all the teens too. So, he held back the questions he had for all of them, and his suspicion turned to interest. Yes. He was very interested to see what else his sister's contracted magician was capable of. More importantly, though, he couldn't help but wonder how a human sacred gear user or not was able to withstand a relatively strong attack from a devil and come out completely unscathed, save for his clothes and the fact that said human somehow had a partial demonic transformation. And, since his attention was back on the screens, the Mayu saw that Razor's queen was equally shocked and intimidated by the young man's admittedly scary appearance as everyone else were. One thing was for sure, though. Issei Haidu was in no way, shape or form a normal human. Ubaluna couldn't believe her eyes as she levitated a relatively short distance from the ground via her devil wings. First, the only human in the battlefield was able to detect her presence when she was outside of everyone else's sensing range. Afterwards, he saved one of her intended targets, the second being himself, from a moderately strong explosion. She had used as much demonic energy as she had thought would be enough to take the two out in one clean shot, mostly because the short girl was a rook, according to the disgracefully defeated Shulin. Also, as if a human saving a devil wasn't enough, said human used the dust cloud that her explosion caused to rise as a smokescreen to buy himself some time. And, not only did he come out of her attack completely unscathed in terms of body injuries, he had partially transformed into something utterly horrifying, and she was captivated in the worst way possible by his appearance. Worst of all, however, were his now mismatched eyes that she had the pleasure of staring right back at in absolute fear. Half of his body was like it was before. His other half, though, was a ghostly white color, which included that intimidating horn on the left side of his head. Half of his lips had turned pitch black, and his left eye had a haunting black sclera and a goldish yellow pupil. His terrifying, demonic look was completed with his swords and an aura of bloodlust radiating off of him and the swords. What are you? Ubaluna finally found her voice, stuttering in fear and disbelief as she descended on the ground, her mind barely registering the fact that she landed safely at a seemingly safe distance from the transformed human and that her wings magically disappeared in her back. Instead of answering verbally, Issei's bigger sword was enveloped in a pitch black and blood-red aura as he raised it in a basic fashion for an overhead slash. Poor Ubaluna was glued to her spot out of fear and dread at what he was preparing for her. It was when it seemed that his attack was ready that he spoke, but it wasn't to answer her question. Itsuga at his easily heard muttering, the unknown energy around the sword pulsed. Tensho. With a furious roar that was reflected in his eyes, Issei swung his sword downwards and a thin crescent-shaped blade, twice the caster's height in the aforementioned colors, shot out of the sword vertically, heavily destroying the ground on its wake. It headed towards the two stunned to move, react or properly defend herself Ubaluna in such a quick pace that, even with her enhanced speed, defense and magic as a queen, she wouldn't be able to react quickly enough. As a result, Ubaluna could only scream in agonized pain as the blade hit her and continued its trajectory towards the gym, her screams echoing throughout the battlefield. It was unfortunate that she couldn't reach into her cleavage for the bottle of phoenix tears that her king had so graciously given to her. Yet, even if she could, she was sure that it was destroyed by whatever attack this was from the normally brunette boy. Just before she impacted on the gym's wall, she fainted from the pain and the second to third degree burns the attack caused her. Just in time too, because, once the blade touched the wall, boom, an even bigger explosion occurred. So strong, in fact, that the whole battlefield's ground shook violently. There were a few minutes of stunned silence, Razor included. Though, not only because of what could have caused an explosion as powerful as the ones the Phoenix Devil could do at his most angered state, but mostly at the announcement that followed the few minutes of utter silence. Riser Phoenix Ama's queen, retired. In spite of her shock at the news, Riaz found great satisfaction that her arranged fiancé's queen was out of the game, while she had all her servants in prime condition. Not to mention her ice, even if she knew that his mere participation in this match was overkill, since he all but guaranteed her victory against Razor. So, with newfound confidence, she stood up from her desk as soon as the announcement was made, which, coincidentally, matched the time that the tremors throughout the campus stopped. Asia. Riaz called out to her bishop half seriously half warmly, getting the scared girl's attention. It's time we move out as we talked earlier. Poor Asia could only nod dumbly, still dumbfounded from what occurred mere minutes ago. When the two were outside of the old school building, Riaz started walking rather normally, her bishop following her by her side. Iridide's plan was to face Razor, while the others namely Issei were distracted by Razor's remaining peerage members. Although, if she was honest, she would be lucky if she got out with just a chewing out by Issei about her actions or if he didn't go after Razor before she had the chance to do so herself. That said, knowing a little about her contracted magician, she was pretty sure he would let her have her fun before he chewed her out and proceeded to punish her. Most probably with some serious training. Riaz tried her best to hide the huge sweat drop at her own thoughts as she walked in tense silence beside Asia, her previous thoughts making her forget to give orders on what should everyone else do. Although, in hindsight, it should be obvious, since Razor's queen was defeated, Akeno and Yudo were to meet up with Issei and Kaneko and go to face the rest of Razor's peerage at the track and field. It was fortunate that Issei took her request to not make this quick at heart. Otherwise, she was pretty sure that she would be in the middle of an interrogation by her family by now. Riaz hoped that Issei would be willing to face the inevitable brunt of that instead of herself. After all, she didn't know anything about his abilities outside of the boosted gear. Even then, she had seen him use it only once and it was only for mere minutes. Iridide shook her head to clear her mind. She had to deal with Razor first. She would cross that bridge afterwards. Udo and Akeno approached Issei and Kaneko from the ground, their initially worried expressions turning concerned at the sight of the petite girl looking at the brunette in obvious caution. Of course, aside from Issei and Asia, everyone else was unaware that their king had compromised their plan. So, it was natural that they focused on why Kaneko seemed to radiate distrust towards the secretly strongest member of the orc. That said, they saw no sign of demonic-looking Issei, as the brunette had a completely human appearance. Although, Rara Kaneko-chan, you gave me quite a scare. Akeno tittered teasingly towards the now glaring ineffectively at herself Rook. But you didn't tell us that Issei-kun is basically naked, she sing-songed with a light blush on her cheeks as she drank in his appearance with his heavily tattered clothes. A blush that was there since she almost orgasmed at her fellow queen's agonized screams. Inwardly, she wished that she had been there to witness the event, but she was satisfied with what her ears gave her. For now, that is. Udo just chuckled in amusement at the sight of his almost naked friend. Said friend just sighed in exasperation at Akeno's antics, albeit with a small fond smile on his face. Wordlessly, Issei used the magic he was taught to fix his clothes, resisting the urge to smirk teasingly and victoriously at Akeno's pouty www. We need to move. Rafer's remaining peerage is waiting on us at the track and field. He casually informed. The queen and the knight blinked in surprise at the information, which was enough to distract them from laughing at his intentional mispronunciation of Razor's name. Both of them were quick to regain themselves, though. So, that leaves 2 pawns, a rook, 2 bishops and the 2 knights. Udo stated mostly to himself. There are still more opponents than us, Kiba-kun. Akeno told him in a rarely seen serious tone. Not to mention Razor himself. Yes, but, like them, we're all at prime condition. Udo retorted with a plastic smile on his lips. That doesn't mean we get to overestimate ourselves or underestimate our opponents. Issei broke their argument with his own serious voice, making them including the silent Kaneko involuntary shiver. Issei-kun, Udo spoke up with an unreadable expression as he looked at his friend, raising a weird tension in the air. Why did you attack Razor's queen so violently before? Even if it sounded like a question, it was basically a demand. And everyone present knew it. Not that the brunette minded answering. Apparently, Razor had predicted the possibility of his servants losing at the gym, so he had his queen on standby to take us out when our guard would be down due to our accomplishment. In other words, he used his queen as a means to hit Riaz and our morale. The reason, however, behind the violence is that she took pleasure in attacking so cowardly. I could hear her moans in the sky as she fantasized about our pained screams and the despair she would have caused, and it pissed me off. Whatever the trio was expecting, this explanation especially in a calm tone was most definitely not it. All 3 blushed slightly at what they heard as his words managed to put images through their heads. Pervert. Kaneko deadpanned at him after she managed to fight her blush down. Not my fault she was a delusional sadist. Issei shrugged carelessly, not offended by the white-hair girl's insult. Kaneko wisely kept her mouth shut after that because she knew he was right. And what about the strange transformation Kaneko-chan told us about? Akeno's question might have come out as calm, but it was obvious she was on edge by the mere mention of this. From the corner of her almost closed eyes she saw Kaneko and Yudo stiffen. On the other hand, Issei was completely calm as he looked at her. "It's part of my sword's Zangetsu's power," he explained vaguely. Then Yudo interjected in a serious tone. "What about the bloodlust, Ice-kun?" he demanded. "It was far higher than the time you released your sword's true form against that fallen angel." Issei was reminded of the fact that he still hadn't explained anything regarding his power with Zangetsu. Releasing a slightly defeated sigh, he gave a short explanation. "Basically, what you refer to as bloodlust is just a condensed amount of power that I have to release when I reveal Zangetsu's true form or whatever power I use when wielding him. The power is so great and so condensed that it resembles killing intent. Or, as you said, bloodlust." While his explanation did have the effect of calming the trio down, it still left them a little confused. The same could be said for Riaz and Asia, who heard this conversation as well due to Akeno having activated her earpiece for them to listen. The two could only look at each other in confusion before they continued on with their trek. None of them could have expected his next words, though. "But you want to see an attack in my transformed state that could easily win this rating game if I used it in the beginning?" Issei asked them with a mischievous glint in his eyes and a matching smirk. Understandably, the trio were caught off guard by this. The same with Riaz and Asia, who stopped dead in their tracks. The moment of stunned silence was broken by the Redeed, who spoke sternly through her earpiece. "Do it." Her order caught even Issei, who wasn't aware that she was listening, off guard. "Come again?" He blinked in surprise. "Do it." Riaz repeated in a calmer fashion. "Shoot your attack towards our base, Ice." "Are you sure, Riaz?" Akeno asked worriedly, concerned about her friend's safety. "Don't worry about Riaz," Issei said dismissively, earning questioning demanding glares from the trio close to him. "She's close to Rainer's base by now, along with Asia-chan, wanting to face off against Razor with Asia-chan as support." His nonchalantly spoken words managed to make the trio greatly shocked and the accused duo flinch. So much so that nobody reacted at his habit of mispronouncing Razor's name. "Is that true, Riaz Butchu?" Strangely enough, it was Kaneko who demanded an explanation. After a beat of uncomfortable silence, during which Akeno became increasingly angry at her friends and King's recklessness, came Ria's defeated reply. "Yes." Akeno frowned in displeasure and shared the same look with everyone there. "In that case," she spoke seriously. Since the king she stressed the word, making Riaz flinch harshly on the other end of the connection. "Gave the okay to do so, Ice-kun, please, do the honors." In spite of her seriousness, the queen was nothing if not polite. And Issei really liked that about her. In fact, since he shared her sentiment at Ria's action behind their backs, he was really tempted to punish Riaz with Akeno's help. Putting these thoughts in the back of his mind, while ignoring the uproarious laughter of his two tenants at his thoughts, he replied in a calm manner. "Okay." A brief flash of ethereal blue light enveloped his shorter sword before Issei entered his transformed state. Riaz and Asia heard 3 breaths hitch simultaneously and decided to fly on top of a tall tree to see what was going on. Especially since that aura Issei talked about came back with a vengeance. Even at the distance they were at, they had perfect visuals at the area of their comrades, and they involuntarily flinched in fear at Issei's appearance. All 5 devils witnessed the brunette stabbing his longer sword on the ground before he turned to face the direction of the old school building. Then, he leaned his head a little forward and used his short sword to cut the tip of his right index finger. The drop of blood that was about to fall on the ground, he put it on the tip of his horn. Immediately, the devils throughout the battlefield felt as if the gravity around them increased tenfold. Even more so when a red ball of energy, the size of a fist, crackling with some kind of red lightning, formed right on the tip of his horn. The devils noticed that, as he gathered this weird energy to charge the red ball, the gravity around them continued to increase. On a side note, Razor and the remaining members of his peerage were confused and annoyed at these strange phenomena. When it was successfully charged up, at least for Issei's standards, the gravity returned to normal so fast that every devil including Razor and his peerage stumbled to find their balance. A brief eerie silence followed that had all the devils on edge. Then, abruptly, Issei shocked his allies as he turned towards the track and field, and his next words, spoken in an eerily calm tone, froze their blood in their bodies. Also, right after he spoke, Riaz, her peerage and the viewers felt that the saying "all hell broke loose" couldn't even begin to describe what followed. Gran Re Zero. The complete and utter destruction that Issei's attack caused left everyone in the watchroom in stunned shock, their eyes displaying the feeling of disbelief at what transpired mere moments ago. After all, it wasn't every day that a human this young, like Issei Haidu, was powerful enough to wipe out of existence a third of Kuo Academy's ginormous campus with seemingly little to no effort. Yet, Grafia was forced to regain her composure in order to announce the result of the brunette's attack. 2 pawns, 1 bishop, 1 rook and 2 knights from Razor Phoenix Sama's side, retired. Serziches, who was the next to come back from his shock trance, internally gave his wife credit for not completely losing her wits, which was something that everyone else in the room seemed to have done so. Lord and Lady Phoenix breathed a sigh of relief, which didn't go unnoticed by the rest, but no one seemed willing to comment on. It seems that Razor used a teleportation circle to save his sister in the nick of time. Smart move, considering that it wasn't against the rules to teleport inside the dimension. Serziches thought in approval of Razor's action. Even if such a move could be considered many things, the Mayu appreciated Razor's instinct to protect his family first, before anyone else. Because, truth be told, the devastating attack never reached Razor's remaining peerage members. In between the seconds Issei Haidu's attack needed to reach his peerage, Razor witnessed it from the roof of the new school building and forcefully retired them. Except from his sister. Serziches deduced rightfully so that she held a bottle of Phoenix tears. And, after seeing what the brunette was capable of, it seemed that Razor would take someone seriously for the very first time. That said, the Mayu with the title of Lucifer found himself feeling excited and intrigued at what else this Haidu Issei was capable of and couldn't wait to see it with his own eyes. And, just for good measure, he would order everyone involved in the raiding game to keep quiet. Otherwise, if the council heard of Issei Haidu's capabilities, there would be a shitstorm that he would be hard-pressed, if not outright incapable of, to suppress. 2 pawns, 1 bishop, 1 rook and 2 knights from Razor Phoenix Ama's side, retired. Rias and her peerage had their mouths and trembling eyes almost impossibly wide open, their bodies shivering uncontrollably, a motion that was mimicked by their hearts. Their minds struggled to comprehend the result of Issei's attack that, other than a buzzing sound at its execution, its impressively tall and wide size and the explosion it caused, which was at least 5 times stronger than his previous one, was not otherwise flashy. They didn't even register Graphia's announcement. Slowly, they turned their heads, expecting to see him at least a bit winded. Imagine their further shock when they saw him look lighter and with a satisfied smile on his lips, instead of being ready to fall face first to the ground. Issei sighed in satisfaction as he reverted back to normal. That felt a little liberating. His words made them shiver. When he noticed their horrified gazes, including the ones given by Rias and Asia from their position, he barely suppressed a flinch. "You went overboard with your show-off, partner." Drake deadpanned in his head. This didn't comfort the brunette in the slightest. Zangetsu, on the other hand, was clearly of the opposite opinion, considering his gleeful laughter. That was awesome. He cheered as if a 5-year-old child was witnessing its hero kicking ass right in front of its eyes. Again, he wasn't comforted. Instead, all he felt was guilt that he let his previously bottled-up emotions get the better of him, which resulted in scaring the only people, other than Rin and his parents, that he had gotten along with. He was pretty sure that most, if not all, of the people in the watchroom were sharing the same looks. The look that he had come to despise, of someone being afraid of him. Which, in turn, made him afraid to come close to other people. His guilt turned to anger, directed at himself. Always. There were always people that were afraid of him, for some reason or another. And the perpetrator for that was always himself. Due to this thought, his mind went back to when Sona asked him a question that caused him to create some distance between them. This time, in his mind, he would create even more distance with everyone due to his own actions and the need to vent his bottled-up frustrations. He would lose all his friends. And it would be solely his own fault. At those admittedly dark thoughts that made him feel like he hated himself, his head leaned forward and his front hair shadowed his eyes before he reverted back his sword and stabbed it to the ground. The brunette himself was the one to break the heavy and uncomfortable silence that had befallen after his attack. "Zangetsu, come out and protect them." Issei simply ordered in a calm yet cold tone. This action made the devils snap out of their horrified trance. Also, it made them confused as to what he meant. This included the newly arrived Rias and Asia, as well as the viewers. Oh. And Razor and his little sister, the latter of whom was hiding behind her brother, completely and utterly scared out of her mind. Both of them were hovering a good distance away from Ria's gathered forces. It seemed that Issei had a knack of shocking everyone in repetitive fashion. All devils and the not afraid to hide her nature as a fallen angel, Raynor were left gaping at the sight of an albino version of Issei, although looking more menacing and holding a black version of his sword that materialized from his original sword, wearing an intimidating smirk as he looked at the brunette and, then, at his allies. "Yo." He greeted simply in his 2-layered voice. There was no person, devil or fallen angel, in the watchroom that didn't blink in confused shock at the sight of an albino Issei Haidu materializing out of his sword. His voice was nothing like his wielder, though. What just happened? Raynor was the one to voice what everyone else was seeing, her eyes wide open and her jaw slightly slacked from how long it was open for the past few minutes. In hindsight, neither she nor the devils in the room had ever encountered a person that could surprise them so much repetitively, not necessarily for good, much less a human. Although, it was obvious to everyone by now that Issei Haidu was by no means a normal human. I believe that everyone in this room would like to know about the past few minutes of the rating game, and the best person to answer that is currently fighting in it. Serziches replied calmly and diplomatically. Clearly, he was used to political conversations, hiding his excitement and intrigue for the brunette. Rainer was understandably surprised that such a high-class being, a man no less, gave her the time of his day to answer her, a rogue low-class fallen angel. And I also believe that all of you youngsters have some more insight on Issei Haidu that you let on. Something that includes my sister and her peerage. Sona, Tsubaki and Rainer flinched collectively at Serzich's calmly spoken words, taking it as a subtle accusation. This didn't go unnoticed by the older devils, but they didn't comment on it. Instead, the Grimoire and Phoenix patriarchs gave defeated sighs, gaining the attention of everyone in the room. Oh, well. Lord Phoenix started as he looked at Zeoticus Grimoire with a friendly smile. It seems that the agreement between our families will be null and void in a few minutes. He shamelessly admitted. After all, he was experienced enough to see his son's defeat coming from a mile away. I wouldn't dare to underestimate your son's prowess, Lord Phoenix, but I'm all but inclined to agree. Zeoticus gave his begrudging agreement with his own friendly smile. We all saw that, even after performing attacks of such grand scale, my daughter's contracted magician seems to be raring to go for more. At the very least, this fight will teach my son a lesson, that the power of regeneration we possess as a clan is not absolute. Razor's father lamented with a sad smile to himself, feeling sorry that he wasn't able to do that in the past, and, as a result, the power of a phoenix went over his son's head. I do hope, however, that my daughter won't be collateral damage. He added as an afterthought. I wouldn't worry about that. Serziches interjected in their conversation, earning their attention, which included the until now silent wives and a trio of surprised youngsters. He was looking at the screens as he spoke, closely observing the person that piqued his interest. Razor was quick to save his peerage by retiring them in the nick of time, probably aware that they wouldn't even survive such an attack. Also, he used a teleportation circle to get his sister close to him, which also saved her. He analyzed casually. Although, none of us can deny that his latest action was to take the bottle of Phoenix tears from his sister. Even if it is a smart move on his part, I don't think it will be enough to win this match. So, you agree with us, then, Lucifer-sama? Lord Phoenix asked for clarification. Yes. The man replied shortly and honestly, his attention never leaving the screen. Also, I would advise this conversation to come to an end. Things are heating up again. At his casual remark, everyone turned to the screens again, with the three younger girls feeling surprised that the two families didn't make a fuss over the soon-to-be null engagement. And, just like the Mao pointed out, things were heating up again. After Zangetsu's casual greeting, there was only shocked silence. And fearful looks. Looking at his wielder's back, Zangetsu's smirk was replaced by a fierce scowl. You know, King, I thought I told you that I hate the rain. Just before you took me out of here, it was almost flooded in a matter of seconds. He said strongly. Sorry. Issei's cold response didn't seem like he felt sorry in the slightest. The devils, including Razor and his sister, who had landed a small distance away from the group, couldn't help but flinch at the sight of the albino's scowl turning even fiercer. So, now you're gonna be depressed that your devil friends are scared of you, for who knows how long. Zangetsu's eerily calmly spoken question made Issei's allies and the brunette himself flinch at the almost accurate accusation. Seeing this, his expression turned downright furious and, without saying anything, his sword released its true form, surprising the devils. I thought me and the lizard had taught you better than that, King. He hissed angrily as he took a stance, ready to attack his wielder. His two-layered voice, his furious expression and the fact that he seemed ready to go berserk made all the devils back up a bit. They were too preoccupied with what was going on to comment on who was this lizard. Said lizard gave an irritated growl inside of Issei's head, but it was ignored. It became worse for the devils when both sides of Zangetsu's head produced horns, identical to the one Issei had during his transformation. I'm warning ya, King. Snap out of it, or am I gonna fight you to most certainly kill ya. Zangetsu threatened eerily calmly, much to the further shock of the devils, which included the ones watching the rating game. Issei's fists were clenched tightly at his sides, and everyone could see droplets of blood falling slowly to the ground. Zangetsu, for once, please, leave me alone. He matched his sword spirit's tone. No can do. Zangetsu replied calmly, making the devils look at him as if he was crazy, something that he completely ignored. Even if it was true. Why don't you get out of your depressed state and fight Razor, before I fight you? He suggested, trying to remind his wielder that the latter had a task to complete. Razor suppressed a shiver down his spine as he stood protectively in front of his sister. Would you just shut up, for once? Issei's outburst caught the devils completely off guard, making them jump in surprise at how loud he was. Even more so when he raised his head and they all saw his hateful glare towards his albino self. Zangetsu was the only one unaffected by this turn of events. If you continue like this, Ice, you're gonna go completely insane. He warned sternly with dangerously narrowed eyes. Is that what you want to happen? Is that something your parents would be happy about ya? Or even those that you feel depressed at scaring them? Issei was ready to go ballistic but held himself back at these words and harshly gritted his teeth in anger as he glared at his albino counterpart. Because Zangetsu continued in a grim tone. If you do so, then, you're gonna lose everyone you actually care about. The devils here, Sona, Rainer, your parents and even R. The sword spirit was forcefully interrupted when his wielder suddenly appeared right in front of him with his right fist, clad in a shiny black substance, ready to meet the former's face in a very violent and surely painful way. It was fortunate that Zangetsu was as fast as his wielder. He was able to cross his swords in front of his face in an X pattern. The collision of the fist and the swords caused a violent shockwave that blew everyone else off their feet for a couple of meters. And, because it caught them by surprise, no one was fast enough to regain their footing, thus making them fall on their backs. For Razor, he was lucky that he had put the bottle of Phoenix Tears in his dress shirt's front pocket and not in his pants. Otherwise, he wouldn't have a way to heal himself, should the need arise. And, if he was honest to himself, after witnessing everything so far, he was pretty sure that he would need it. Don't you dare finish that sentence, Zangetsu, or so help me. Issei threatened with a furious expression, locked in a stalemate with his sword speared. As long as you get what I'm saying, I don't need to. Zangetsu replied casually, albeit his eyes were glaring a hole to his wielder's angry ones. Speaking of, only the viewers were able to see the brunettes' eyes turning into reptilian slits, making them confused at this phenomenon. The stalemate between the two lasted for a few more seconds, during which the devils came back on their feet. Razor, for his part, was becoming increasingly angrier by the second. While the events so far were shocking, to say the least, he wanted nothing more than to eliminate the brunette for humiliating him and his peerage. And, in his anger, he had forgotten about his fiancée and her peerage. After all, the unstable brunette in his line of sight had made this personal and his pride as a high-class devil wanted nothing but to prove himself superior. Issei was the first to retract his fist, with Zangetsu following by lowering his swords. The two continued to glare at one another for a few more seconds before their intense stare-off was interrupted quite rudely. You? Hearing a low, angry voice, Issei, Zangetsu, Rias and her peerage turned their heads towards a livid-looking Razor. Razor has had enough of you. Razor suddenly yelled furiously as he was engulfed in bright, raging orange flames. His outburst, while surprising for Rias and her peerage, made them go behind the now deadpanning powerful duo. For good measure, Rias took the initiative and erected a barrier, which she was immediately helped by Akeno and Asia to make it stronger. Mostly because they wanted to be protected by the heat of Razor's flames. Even in his angered state, Razor saw this and was reminded of the fact that his sister was right behind him. Ravel, he spoke a lot more calmly, without breaking eye contact with his target. Go behind that barrier with my fiancée and her peerage. He all but ordered. Ravel didn't need to be told twice as she did as told, looking completely out of her depth. Understandable, since she had never seen someone cause so much destruction without looking the least bit winded. Not even her now angry and serious brother. Zangetsu? Issei called out eerily calmly as he turned to fully face his new adversary. Or was it old, but he got distracted? Not that it mattered much. Protect everyone behind that barrier, including Rafer's sister. The brunette ordered. He didn't see it, but the sword spirit nodded his understanding and walked backwards, stopping right before the barrier in a way that allowed everyone inside to see the two soon-to-be combatants. This time, there was a rise at the brunette's latest habit. It's Razor, you low-life buffoon. Razor exclaimed in indignant anger, the flames around him growing in intensity and, as a result, the heat in the area grew as well. Much to the curiosity of everyone that wasn't Zangetsu, Issei seemed completely unaffected by the heat. I know. Issei responded casually, baffling Razor into silence for the moment. It's just that I can't stand some things about you. Namely your arrogance, which is so big that it makes you speak for yourself in third person, and the fact that you see some people as nothing but objects. His explanation made Razor confused. What are you talking about, human? First off, if you want me to call you by your name, you should do the same for me. Issei pointed out as if something simple like that was obvious, which was by the way. To Razor's internal embarrassment, he had forgotten the brunette's name. That said, he had a way to avoid embarrassing himself. Or, at least, he thought so for himself. A high-class devil such as myself doesn't need to remember the name of low-lives like you, human. He said with a mocking smirk. Issei took a small calming breath before I see. He sighed lightly in disappointment. A sentiment that he felt for all the devils that no doubt were similar to, or worse than Razor. Then, his expression turned serious and straightened his posture, making himself look imposing without even trying. The brunette didn't know it, but at that moment, he had genuinely impressed most of the people watching him. The fact that he was willing to protect Razor's sister without questions asked helped wonders. Then, I'll make you remember my name. Issei declared strongly as a dark red aura outlined his body, and the pressure around made it difficult for Razor to even stand properly. A few 10 seconds passed before Issei's next words managed to shock people for the upteenth time, accompanied by the flashy appearance of the Security's gauntlet on his left arm, the voice coming off of it sounding quite ominous, even as it echoed throughout the battlefield. Greg, come on out. Boosted gear. Boost. What? Razor and his sister gaped in disbelief. They weren't the only ones. That boy, both patriarchs gasped in unison, their wives faring no better than them. Is this generation's Red Dragon Emperor? Serziches and his wife shared their shock, but both regained their composure quicker than last time. Glancing at the Arbiter, the Mayu saw her narrow her eyes, but couldn't tell the emotions behind them. It was obvious, though, that she was as in the dark as the adults in the room, Razor and his peerage were. However, judging by the lack of reaction from the three youngsters on second thought, after he glanced at them, they were smirking victoriously, just like his sister and her peerage. Well, aside from Asia Argento. The girl seemed to be in the same boat as himself and the others. Meaning that the younger devils and the soul fallen angel were well aware of the fact that Issei Haidu was the host of the Red Dragon Emperor for quite some time. Serziches allowed a small smile to appear on his lips. His sister had managed to outsmart him in a remarkable way that left him quite impressed. In his mind, just by this fact alone, Riaz had earned her freedom. The freedom that he would make sure to give her and every other devil that wished to marry someone of their own choice. The elders from the council could bitch and moan all they wanted, but Serziches wasn't in the mood to be in this kind of situation again, just because his parents more, so his father were in a hurry for Riaz to have a suitor. Additionally, he had a weapon, so to speak, that no other faction had. Seraphol Leviathan. Sona's older sister and his fellow Mau. Although, her area of expertise was of the foreign affairs. The usually bubbly and childish girl was a beast when it came to get what she wanted, and Serziches was sure that she would be on board with his idea. After all, they were also fellow renowned cis-cons. Don't be so surprised, Railer. Issei said calmly. Razor regained his composure at the remark and wore a serious expression as he addressed the brunette, ignoring the mispronunciation of his name. Razor sees. It's no wonder that you're so strong to wipe out an experienced peerage in the raiding games almost by yourself. You're the Red Dragon Emperor, and you have undoubtedly trained with the Longinus, the boosted gear, for quite some time. Riaz, her peerage and even Ravel were surprised to hear Razor showing genuine respect to someone that wasn't a devil. Of course, they weren't the only ones. Even the Phoenix Devil's parents were pleasantly surprised at this turn of events. This, also, included Ria's parents, her brother and sister-in-law, her childhood friend and queen and, lastly, Rainer. Additionally, even if they didn't show it, Issei and Zangetsu were caught off guard. And rightfully so, considering the slightly taller young man's attitude up until a few moments ago. That said, Razor's serious voice brought everyone out of their musings. Razor has too much pride as a devil to surrender without a fight. So, Razor suggests that this fight should decide the outcome of the raiding game. Should Razor lose, Riaz Gremory gains her freedom from our arranged marriage. However, should Razor win, Riaz is to marry Razor without a fuss. Razor paused in his serious speech, letting his words sink in everyone's heads, surprising them even more in the process. Then, he smirked challengingly at his opponent as he finished. So, what do you say, Red Dragon Emperor? Riaz was about to yell her disagreement on the matter, but the combination of a sharp look from Zangetsu and Issei's even quicker response stopped her in her tracks. I accept, Issei agreed calmly, albeit matching his opponent's smirk with one of his own. On some conditions. He added as an afterthought. Razor listens. The blonde devil responded patiently, glad that his suggestion to a man-to-man fight was accepted, while his blood started pumping with adrenaline out of excitement at the prospect of fighting a person wielding the legendary power of the Red Dragon Emperor. First of all, my name is Haidu Issei. The brunette started explaining in a serious tone, earning a nod of understanding from his adversary. However, after our fight, regardless of the outcome, I'd like you to call me Ice. His declaration caught everyone off guard for the upteenth time, but he didn't care as he continued. Just now, you earned my respect, even if I find it weird that you speak for yourself in third person. As for the other conditions. One is that you won't pester Riaz Gremory about marrying you again, unless it's her own decision. Ignoring a certain Retide's gasp of surprise at his words, that got another nod in understanding from Razor, Issei continued. The other is that everyone behind that barrier, he pointed behind him with his right thumb over his shoulder, is considered a non-combatant and, therefore, we aren't allowed to use them as leverage to win. Lastly, we fight to win, not to kill. All of these are acceptable for Razor. The devil acknowledged with a nod of his head. Then, let's make it official. Issei said calmly, confusing everyone, before he looked towards the sky. He didn't know it, but he had made the devils and the fallen angel in the watchroom very surprised that every single screen he was in looked like he was staring right at Graphia's eyes. As for Graphia herself, she suppressed another shiver at his intense gaze and outwardly kept her cool, stoic and professional demeanor. Inwardly, however, she was screaming her lungs out at how he was able to have such an effect on her, feeling like her soul was left bare for the brunette to read. If any of the rules that we spoke about are violated, the other side wins automatically. The brunette's declaration was met with stunned silence from everyone that wasn't Surzich's, Zangetsu and Razor. If it is agreeable by the Mayu, then I don't see why not. Razor put in his 2 cents with a careless shrug of his shoulders. Then I, Surzich's Lucifer, agree to your terms. Every person in the battlefield blinked in shock at that. Not because the duo's terms were agreed, but because the Mayu spoke in the first place. Ani Samarias breathed out in shock as she looked at the sky in a vain attempt to metaphorically look into her brother's eyes. So, how about I help you two fight to your heart's content by teleporting every non-combatant in the watchroom? Surzich's suggestion was met with immediate agreement by the two as they claimed yes, please. Simultaneously, before they mock-glared at one another. Fufufu. Surzich's amused chuckle made all of them look at the sky once more. I truly enjoy your spirit so far, so I have come to the decision to reward the winner of this match, but first. The Mayu's pause was followed by surprised yelps as the girls and Yudo were forcefully teleported out of the battlefield. After all, his latest words had managed to catch everyone off guard. So, Surzich's continued as if nothing happened. The winner has the right to make a wish specifically for me, and I will do my best to fulfill it. It doesn't matter what it is, nor the time that it will be made, be it right after the match or at some time in the future. The Mayu's words had the effect of motivating the two boys to win, judging by the wide, challenging smirks they sent to one another. With that, whenever you're ready, you can begin your fight. Flames started coming out of Razor's form, while a more intense blood-red aura outlined Issei's body. Zangetsu, seeing that there was no need for his assistance anymore, disappeared back into his wielder's mind, glad that the downpour had stopped. As for Issei's sword, it disappeared in a flash of light back to the brunette's pocket dimension. However, none of that mattered for the two combatants. As the tension between the two rose uncontrollably, albeit with not necessarily malicious intent, Issei broke the silence. Balance break. Razor had only a moment to widen his eyes in shock at the calmly spoken words, a sentiment that was shared by everyone that didn't know that Issei could use such a strong technique. Welsh Dragon Balance Breaker, Scale Mail. Braig's booming voice announced and, after a brilliant flash of blood-red light, Issei was clad in his scale mail armor. The power he emitted was enough to root Razor in his spot out of pure disbelief. And, for the first time in his life, the Phoenix Devil felt an emotion that had been foreign to him up until that moment. Fear. Let the battle between the legendary Phoenix and the host of one of the heavenly dragons begin. Somehow, Razor just knew he was set up to lose, and Lucifer's excited announcement didn't make him feel less scared. That said, he wouldn't go down without a fight. So, mind telling us here how long you knew that your contracted magician was the Red Dragon Emperor, Riaz? Surzich's asked his sister in a casual tone once she and the rest were teleported to the watchroom. He would have called her Riatan, but he had the sense to not do so in front of the Phoenix clan. The female Retide sighed dejectedly as she looked at her brother, also sparing a glance to the other important people, before she answered. From the very beginning, Ani-sama. She said truthfully, not breaking eye contact with him, despite the shame she felt from being called out in such a manner. It was clear to her family that Riaz had grown even more of a backbone. The Mayu felt both sad and proud that his little sister was growing so fast. His sentiments were shared by their father. Their mother, on the other hand, was visibly of different opinion, but chose not to comment on anything. She was sure that, at this moment, whatever she would tell her daughter would enter from one ear and exit from the other, considering that the younger girl's future was at stake from the outcome of the fight they were all about to witness. I would suggest that every conversation be put on hold. Graphia's stoic voice brought everyone's attention to her, seeing her look solely at the screens. Knowing that every pair of eyes was on her, the maid and arbiter of this match continued speaking. The young boys seemed ready to start a very interesting conversation before their fight. At that, all eyes turned to the screens, just as they heard Razor question something that piqued all of their interest, especially Riaz. Before we fight, Razor has a question, Issei Haidu. Razor spoke calmly, albeit seriously. I'm listening. Issei replied in the same tone. Why do you seem so adamant on interfering with this union between Razor and his fiancée? He tilted his head slightly to the right as he spoke, while also crossing his arms against his chest. It was more of a demand than a question. That said, Issei took a moment to gather his thoughts to answer truthfully because he liked speaking honestly more than anything. Well, first and foremost, even as a human, me and my parents despise the concept of arranged marriages. Razor nodded in understanding at the explanation, even if he disagreed with his opponent's opinion, considering that he was a devil and the concept they were talking about had been in the devil culture for more than a few centuries. Especially after the civil war between the old Mao faction and anti-Mao faction. I don't like seeing people close to me being sad, and Riaz and her peerage are a big part of those few people that I feel close to. So, I won't allow anyone to make her sad, even if it's her own family. His declaration drew a bright blush on Riaz's face, not that he could see it, and surprised gasps from more than a few devils. Razor, though, was just curious. So, you mean that it's just your own selfishness at your beliefs that makes you fight for what you think is right? The blonde devil's question made several people feel offended because they thought Issei to be selfless, not selfish. Issei, however, wasn't offended as he shrugged carelessly before he spoke again. Call it what you want, but I'm sure that you'd try everything you could to prevent something similar from happening to your sister should she be in the same position as Riaz. He said calmly. Razor was almost ready to lash out violently at his opponent due to him mentioning his sister and a bad situation in the same sentence. However, miraculously, he held himself back. That said, the Phoenix Devil was wearing a fierce scowl on his face. I'm sorry if I offended you, Razor, Issei apologized with a placating gesture of his hands in a surrendering motion. But, from your reaction alone, it seems that we agree on something. He finished calmly. And what is that? Razor demanded through gritted teeth, still angry but considerably calmer than a few seconds ago. That the unwritten law about arranged marriages should be a thing of the past. For this is my wish to the Mao if no, when I win. To allow high-class devils like Riaz and Sona or even yourself and your sister to marry whoever they want out of their own choice. Class and race shouldn't matter for things like love. People, no matter their race or age, or if they're good or bad, have feelings. Feelings that should be respected and taken into consideration, even if the general population rejects them out of close-mindedness. So, in this match, I fight for Riaz and every other devil's freedom of choice, which includes you and your sister, as well as low and middle-class devils, because they are people with feelings too. No matter if they're good or bad in the eyes of the devil population. Issei showed his resolve in his passionate speech, which left all the devils more than flabbergasted and in awe of the way his mind worked. The brunette didn't know it yet, but he had earned the respect from every single person that was watching this. Mostly Surziches and Grafia for multiple reasons to be described at this moment. Also, he had made more than a few hearts skip several beats. Especially Riaz. Razor has no words to describe how your words have affected him, as he is sure the ones watching are just as affected. The blonde devil said emotionally. Issei, though, was sensing a butt coming from a mile away. However, Razor continued seriously, confirming the brunette's assumption. Razor will fight for the devil's more than a few centuries-old traditions. He declared strongly, showing his own resolve, just as his form was engulfed in even bigger orange flames than before. Issei felt his respect for Razor grow at that moment. Both were going to fight for what they believed in. Then, come at me, Razor. He declared loudly, the word boost echoing 5 times by Drake's booming voice in rapid succession. The rise in power from the two caused the very ground they stood on to tremble, the tension in the air to become unbearable, and some pebbles around them to defy gravity and levitate shakily at the violent winds that generated from the powerful duo's show-off. Suddenly, all of that stopped and everything became eerily calm. Then a stray leaf broke their intense eye contact for just a moment as it fell towards the ground. As soon as it touched the ground, both vanished from sight in an impressive show of speed, as if the leaf's actions decided the start of this fight. In less than a second, both combatants appeared mere inches from each other, ready to bash the other's face with their right fists. With no regards to defense, both unleashed their punches with warcries. Both fists landed on their intended targets, generating a shockwave that disturbed the landscape. For a moment, it seemed that the two were equal in power, but that couldn't have been more wrong. Razor's face was the only one turned before he was sent flying at breakneck speeds, crashing back first at the outside wall of the new school building. Without missing a beat, Issei outstretched his left arm, his hand clenched in a fist, before a blood-red ball of energy formed in front of it. Then, he cocked his left fist back and punched the ball. Dragon shot. Bragg's announcement was followed by a wide beam of highly destructive energy, tearing the ground towards Razor's location at lightning speed. It didn't even take 2 seconds to reach the devil, and the result was boom. Another big explosion that shook the ground of the rest of the campus, while also completely destroying Razor's base from its very foundation. The explosion was so loud that it drew out every other noise, which probably included the blonde devil's pained screams. If he even made them in the first place. Also, it raised a dust cloud that concealed the brunette's view of his opponent and the latter's state. Issei just stood where he unleashed his attacks, waiting for Razor to reappear. After all, he knew that the devil's regeneration would kick in right after Razor got his bearings back from the rapid assault he was hit with. The brunette was proven correct when Razor's flaming figure shot out of the unintentional smokescreen, his tattered clothes the only indication he had suffered some damage, heading straight at Issei, with both his fists already ablaze and cocked back. In response, Issei just stood there nonchalantly and slightly raised both his hands. In a second, Razor was upon him and shot his fists at his opponent's face. The armored brunette's hands just as quickly shot upwards and easily caught Razor's punches. The devil was momentarily caught off guard by this development. Especially since Issei stood there unmoving and unflinching, even as the heat from his flames was slightly melting the ground due to the amount of heat he was emanating. The small pause in their battle came to an end as both combatants were of the same mind and started kicking at one another before engaging in a close-quarter combat. From an outside point of view, it seemed like their fight was more of a magical brawl than anything else. That said, marvelous. Truly spectacular. Lord Phoenix and Zeodicus Gremory breathed in awe, completely transfixed from what they were seeing. The sentiment that was shared by everyone else in the room, including their wryly smiling wives, that had a look on their faces that practically screamed boys will be boys. Riaz and her peerage, especially the Redeed, were inwardly disgruntled that, even after their gruesome training by the one fighting for them, they were still weaker than Razor, from what they were seeing. Yet, they couldn't help but agree with the adults that voiced their opinion. The adults in the room may have participated in gruesome wars that left the devil race in general in a crippled condition, but had never seen youngsters fighting for their resolve alone, albeit not to the death. Rainer and the younger devils hadn't either, which was why they were in so much awe of the spectacle on the screens. This is truly admirable. Serziches earned the attention of the room as he spoke from his heart. No matter the outcome of this match, both Razor-kun and Haidu-kun have gained my respect. His words momentarily stunned everyone, more so for his praise towards the two combatants that were still brawling like thugs than the way he addressed them with such familiarity. We, as the Phoenix clan, cannot express how grateful we are for your kind words concerning Razor, Lucifer-sama. Lady Phoenix spoke earnestly as she bowed her head in gratitude, followed by her husband and her daughter, the latter obviously flustered by the Mayu's sudden praise to her brother. Serziches waved off their gratitude with a friendly smile before he focused on the screens, prompting the rest to do so as well. No one was surprised that the fight had come to another pause, nor that Razor was on the losing side. Razor was huffing rapidly, tired from his squabble with his opponent as he jumped back to gain some distance and reclaim his breathing pattern. Yet, he was wearing a very satisfied smirk on his face. His clothes were in an even worse state than before, but he didn't care in the slightest. Inwardly, though, he was surprised that the armored human in front of him didn't even seem winded, which made him wonder how much the brunette had trained to be so strong and durable. That said, he was motivated to do the same after this match, no matter the outcome, for he came to see his opponent as a rival to surpass during their brawl. Please, don't tell me that was all you got, Razor. Razor wasn't offended by the comment because the only thing he heard in Issei's voice was disappointment that their fight seemed to have come to an end. In your dreams? Razor taunted, his smirk widening a fraction. In truth though, his demonic power was at its limit due to how much he had spent on attack and regeneration of his wounds. That didn't mean he didn't want to fight his opponent some more, because, in his mind, this fight was the most satisfying and exciting one he had ever had the pleasure to participate in. Issei remained silent as he glared at his opponent behind his draconic mask, wondering why the blonde had just so blatantly lied to him. His answer came when Razor reached into the front pocket of his dress shirt, from inside, which came a miraculously intact vial with a transparent liquid. What's that? Issei asked curiously, watching in interest as Razor popped the vial open and drank the content. That Razor spoke confidently as he felt himself completely rejuvenating. Was a vial of Phoenix tears. A liquid that only our household can produce and completely heals everything on the one that drinks it, be it any kind of injury, physical fatigue or magic depression. Issei's interest was piqued even more at the explanation he just heard. So, that means you're back at 100%? He asked curiously. Yes. Razor claimed confidently as he raised to his full height, matching Issei's imposing features with his flames coming back in full force. The blonde devil, however, didn't expect his opponent to dispel his scale mail and the boosted gear from his left arm, leaving him more than confused. Not only him, but also everyone in the watchroom as well. Especially since the brunette was smirking mysteriously. "Are you trying to mock me, Issei Haidu?" Razor demanded with dangerously narrowed eyes, his flames reflecting his anger by raging even more. Instead of answering verbally, Issei just widened his smirk and stood nonchalantly. What infuriated the blonde devil, however, was that the brunette put his hands in his pants pockets. Without warning, due to his anger, Razor produced a huge fireball and sent it at his opponent. "Take this." With a scream of frustration. The fireball obscured his view of Issei, which made him lose the latter's smirk, becoming predatory. The viewers, however, didn't miss it, nor the fact that he made no move to dodge. They all saw how his longer than normal canines almost glinted in the light of the flames and how his eyes turned to reptilian slits. Boom. The large explosion followed the contact between the unmoving Issei and the huge fireball. As if knowing that this wasn't enough, Razor sent two more equally big fireballs at his opponent, each hotter than the previous one, producing another couple of explosions that greatly damaged the landscape around them. The devil waited for anything, mostly an announcement that he had won the fight, but he knew better after their first bout to hope for a simple win. What neither Razor nor the viewers, with some of them showing clear worry at what transpired just a few seconds earlier, could have expected, was a low, slurping sound coming from the mountain of flames that Razor's attacks had risen. Slowly, but surely, the mountain was decreasing in size. Then, abruptly, the remaining flames turned to tendrils and went inwards at a faster pace, making Razor's and the viewers' eyes widen in utter shock and disbelief at what was revealed once the flames decreased significantly. Their slacking jaws followed immediately afterwards. All the flames were going inside Issei's gaping mouth, from where the slurping sound was coming, as if it was a vacuum solely for flames. Once every last ember was sucked in his mouth, Issei closed it with a loud snap. "And for the first time eating flames, I can't say I'm particularly pleased." His casual comment made everyone feel even more flag-basted than they already were, with Surzich's interest on the brunette growing even more than before. "Oh, well." Issei sighed in defeat before his face formed a predatory smirk and expression once more, sending shivers down Razor's and some of the viewers' spines. "Now I've got a fire in my belly," he said excitedly as he widened his stance and retracted his hands from his pockets, already clenched in fists. What the hell?" Razor stuttered in disbelief and an emotion he felt at the start of the battle. Fear. Especially at the sight of his gleeful-looking reptilian slits for eyes. That, Issei's casual voice drew undivided attention. "Was a small part of my magic. Something that not even Rias or anyone else, for that matter, knew about, aside from Zangetsu and Drake," he said proudly, almost smugly. His explanation shocked everyone to their core. That said, in spite of his shocked state, Razor was able to pick up a vital part of the explanation. What do you mean small?" he asked in trepidation. "You use Phoenix tears to replenish your demonic power and fatigue." Issei started his explanation in a smug tone. "Me, on the other hand, can do so by consuming all kinds of flames." If what happened before shocked everyone to their core, the explanation downright floored them. They would soon learn that this was only the start. "Also, I'm not affected by any heat or cold, no matter the temperature, and my body heat is always high enough that at the worst winter, I can keep my whole house warm and comfortable for my parents to walk around in summer clothes." Razor gulped nervously at that, because no one from his clan could produce so much body heat without even trying. Which begged the question. "The other part is that you can attack with fire as well." "Bingo." Issei said excitedly as his predatory smirk turned to a matching grin, flooring everyone even more at that. Then, his form erupted in brilliant flames, yellow, orange and red in color, the heat of which made Razor back up and raise his right arm to protect his face, while also melting the ground all around them. The blonde devil was more than shocked at the fact that flames affected him so much in the first place. "I hope you're ready for round 2, Razor." Issei's voice drew the attention of both his opponent and the viewers as he crouched slightly, ready to spring into action. They all noticed that the raging flames took the shape of a roaring dragon over the brunette's form, making him look more intimidating than he already was. Especially when the flames made a noise similar to that of what they were displaying. And, when Issei finished his statement, Razor could only gulp nervously before gathering his resolve. After all, he had clearly lost the first bout, and his gut told him that he would lose the second as well, albeit easier than the first. That, however, didn't mean he would take his imminent defeat hands down. "Because I'm all fired up." 1 hour. That was how much time had passed since the official start of the raiding game. And Issei Haidu had managed to floor even the usually compassed people, like Surziches and Grafia, in rapid succession. This included most of the viewers, except from Rainer and Asia. The soul fallen angel and the ex-nun were the only ones that couldn't be described as usually compassed people, the latter more than the former. Of course, Razor was amongst the first batch of people, even if his arrogance, pride and ego were greater than they should be. The not-so-secret anymore Sekiryu seemed to have a knack for shocking people without even trying. Strangely enough, the brunette's powers excited the audience as well. Probably because power attracts power, but not even the author of this shit could be certain. That said, there were various girls that were attracted to Issei's powers and didn't bother to hide it. Most prominent of all was the quartet of Rias, Akeno, Rainer and Asia, with the latter making a dreamy mutter of so pretty about the brunette's raging flames. Not that anyone disagreed. Even the Phoenix family begrudgingly admitted that Issei's flames were prettier than their own, despite the fact that it hurt their pride as the notorious devil clan that had control over the elements of fire and wind. As for the rest of girls that were attracted to the brunette, Surziches subtly observed that Sona and, surprisingly, Razor's sister, Ravel, had faint dusts of pink on their cheeks. Yet, neither showed their true emotions on their faces. As soon as she regained her composure from the consecutive shocks, Sona wore her usual stoic and professional mask, while Ravel just scowled weakly, trying to give the impression that she wasn't enamored with what she was seeing. The Mayu faintly remembered that Rias had a Japanese term for people like Ravel. Due to her love for Japan and its culture, his sister had become an otaku, another Japanese term that Akeno loved to tease her king about in secret. Anyway, the term was tsundere, a person that expresses the complete opposite of their true feelings until the one they're interested in broke their mask by pushing the right buttons. These kinds of people were both annoying and entertaining to watch, and Surziches was pretty sure he would enjoy teasing his obviously smitten little sister about her already large competition because he knew that Rias was kinda selfish, probably due to her nature as a devil. Anyhow, the Mayu knew that very fun times were ahead concerning Issei Haidu's love life, but he had to concentrate on the match between his person of interest and Razor Phoenix. And he was glad he did, because he and everyone else bore witness to something very rare. Aside from fear, Razor was also apprehensive. For the first time in his life, he found out that he couldn't control the flames of another, something that his household had prided in doing for millennia. Only for one Issei Haidu to come and crash this fact without even a shred of effort. Also, the Phoenix Devil could feel heat. That should be impossible. Yet again, one Issei Haidu was responsible for Razor's less than favorable finding. His body tensed when his opponent widened his stance and leaned backwards, breathing in an insane amount of air and the flames that surrounded him. Much to his further shock, Razor's own flames weren't accepted from Issei's whatever he was doing. Then, an alarm bell started ringing in his whole being to move far away from his spot unless he wanted to become a victim to his opponent's questionable actions. As he did just that with the use of his speed and flaming wings, going behind his opponent at a far distance, Razor was shocked to see a mirage hovering over Issei's form. It was the back of a humongous dragon with dark crimson scales, bat-like wings that were slightly tattered at their ends, and small black spikes that ran in a straight line on its spine, starting from the top of its head. Oh. And it mimicked Issei's actions. And, upon closer inspection, there was a person on top of the dragon's head, but Razor could only pick up 3 distinguishable features. 4, if he counted the fact that the person on top of the dragon was clearly a young man. Otherwise, this young man had pink, spiky hair, the same as Issei's, a white scale-patterned scarf again, similar to Issei's, minus the name of the person being knitted on it, and the same body features as Issei, namely his lean, yet muscular build. Abruptly, Issei turned around and faced him, making the alarm bell in his being go haywire and forcing himself to move once again. He was glad he did so. What happened next would never be forgotten by neither Razor nor the spectators. Fire Dragon Roar. What followed Issei's excited shout was a wide torrent of highly destructive and explosive flames going past Razor, heading straight towards the old school building at the speed of lightning. The yellow, orange, red flames had so much heat in them that incinerated everything in their path, while also making Razor's already tattered clothes melt a little, despite their resistance to fire and magic in general. Then, Razor could only gape in absolute disbelief, his mind almost failing to comprehend what happened once the flames reached their unintended target. And he wasn't the only one. For several seconds, Issei continued spewing those flames from his mouth, the latter forming a ginormous fireball around the entire area of Ria's former base, lighting the entire battlefield in the process. The concentrated heat in that fireball, that stopped enlarging when Issei stopped spewing flames, was enough to melt most of the campus. Also, its size alone was more than intimidating, as well as awe-inspiring. Amazing. Rainer and Asia breathed in awe and amazement, totally entranced by what they were seeing. It's like the very sun itself came crashing down in the dimension. Akeno wholeheartedly agreed with the two as she added her 2 cents in amazed wonder. That's Rias trailed off, incapable of describing what everyone was witnessing. The breath attack seen only by dragons. Sona finished her friend's thought in a clinically analyzing tone. Even if her expression didn't show it, she was more than amazed at what she was seeing on the screens. Ravel didn't say it, but she was glad that her brother had avoided that attack. A sentiment that she silently shared with her parents. Any other comments were put on hold once Udo, surprisingly, pointed out something that should have been obvious from the start in a somewhat strained tone that failed to hide how odd and slightly scared he was. All these concentrated flames are magic, aren't they? Yes. Surziches answered seriously, gaining the attention all around the room. At least, from what Issei Haidu said. Nevertheless he trailed off at the end as he saw the fireball expand without command or warning. Something that everyone else noticed as well and easily figured out what was going to happen and what the Mao and Ria's knight were trying to say. This included the usually naive and clueless Asia. They had no time to react. And neither did Razor. Boom. This was by far the largest explosion Razor had ever witnessed in such a close range. He was blasted backwards at breakneck speeds, the heat wave that hit him made him scream in agony as he sailed through the air. His head and back hit the dimensions barrier and unceremoniously bounced off of it before hitting the ground with a dull thud. The Phoenix Devil was in great pain as he tried to stand up, noting that his regeneration healed all of his wounds, but he was good in terms of demonic power. In other words, he was caught completely off guard. So much so that even his innate abilities worked at a slower rate due to his mind being bongled from what had transpired moments ago. He shakily rose to his feet, still mildly shocked. What greeted his eyes, however, made his mind stop working for a few moments until the image from his eyes got through and it rebooted. His body remained numbly still as his face morphed into a totally flag-bastard expression. The whole battlefield was reduced to an uneven, barren wasteland, filled with ashes and small embers here and there. His head turned robotically and his wide eyes landed on his opponent, the sight of whom sent uncontrollable shivers down his spine, feeling absolutely terrified. Issei had turned to face him, wearing that terrifyingly predatory grin, looking ready to dish out more attacks, while also not winded after an attack that managed to utterly destroy an entire dimension. Razor wanted to piss and crap himself right then and there. In a speed that the Phoenix Devil couldn't have matched even at his best, Issei appeared less than 5 meters away from him. Razor started trembling uncontrollably at the sight of his opponent, who did so without making any sound. On a side note, Issei never made any sound throughout the raiding game, aside from the times when he did so intentionally. Upon seeing Razor's reaction, something inside Issei shattered. It had been completely exhilarating to use the power he hadn't been able to while sparring with dragons and Jetsu. So much so that he had forgotten about the fearful faces of his allies at the result of his Grand Race Zero. The fact that he was allowed to cause as much mayhem as he wanted only added to his excitement, which was why he allowed himself a little loose. While his attack wasn't as powerful as he could make it, it was still powerful enough to completely erase anything in its range. He was pretty sure that he could have destroyed more than half of Kuo if he had performed the attack on his hometown from the hill he had first activated the boosted gear. His mind returned to the fight he was in the middle of once his nostrils caught whiff of Razor's whereabouts. He turned to face his opponent and, from the distance he mistook Razor's expression as an odd one. So, using his so far unrivaled speed, he appeared close to his opponent. His excitement to hear the devil's thoughts died a brutal death because the latter's expression and whole demeanor spoke volumes at what he thought. Slowly, his expression fell to one without a shred of emotion as he was reminded of his allies' reaction from a few minutes ago. His mind immediately took another dark turn that neither of his tenants were expecting. Since everyone he knew was fearful of him, even his supposed allies and, in some cases, friends and love interests, he would continue on his own. Well, not completely, since dragons and Jetsu were with him no matter what. His heart completely shattered in more than 1 billion pieces and a piece of thick rock replaced it. It was foolish of him to think that there would be people, normal or supernatural, that would stay close to him. Or that he could get attached to, his parents being the only exception because he doubted that he would see Rin anytime soon. He hated himself for being so powerful without even asking for it, which ruined his childhood and, apparently, continued to ruin the normal life he had wished for. He completely ignored some hateful whispers that told him to destroy everything on sight. Or something about domination. But, as stated, he completely ignored those whispers. He didn't know it, but Drake was greatly shocked that his host was basically resisting the hatred of his past wielders without even trying, thus avoiding to enter Juggernaut Drive, a powerful yet forbidden state of the boosted gear that he had warned his host once or twice about, but never in detail out of fear for his host's well-being. Zangetsu, on the other hand, silently and stoically observed how the large oak tree in his world simply vanished in thin air due to his wielder's state, thus erasing any chance of the brunette becoming insane. Back to the outside world, specifically the dimension, Issei Haidu or Haidu Issei closed his eyes in resignation at his own thoughts, which he thought to be his fate from now onwards, before opening them. His expression didn't betray any of his previous thoughts, but it was clear that something had happened in his mind, which caused the light in his dark green eyes to dull. Then, he reminded himself that his opponent was a regenerative punching bag, perfect to vent his frustrations. Yet, now that his shattered heart and clear mind were kinda free from those, he didn't feel the need to pummel Razor to the ground. That said, they had a match to finish, and the brunette didn't intend to lose. He didn't care that he would basically free Riaz from her arranged marriage, nor that he had lost the chance to make himself and his parents the wealthiest people in Japan. Or that he would practically force an entire supernatural race to embrace his beliefs on arranged marriages in general. He only cared to finish this match with his head high, go back home to his parents and see from there. Oh. And get paid for his services. Services that he would continue giving in order to provide for himself and not burden his parents, mostly his father, financially. Speaking of, he should ask Azazel for an incredibly handsome paycheck once he'd deal with Kakabiel. But first, he should finish off his opponent, who seemed to have lost all his will to fight. Igniting his form in flames one more step. Issei stepped towards the frozen in shock and terror Razor, making an unnecessary sound for the very first time in the rating game. Something is wrong. Sona muttered loud enough to be heard throughout the watchroom as she observed the brunette's behavior from when he first approached Razor. From beside her, Tsubaki nodded in agreement. Yes, Riaz reluctantly agreed due to what she was seeing. It's like Yudo trailed off in wonder. The time at the church, but worse. Kaneko finished the night's thought with an emotionless tone, but her eyes were slightly narrowed, as if she was trying to read her king's contracted magician. Failing at that, much to her inner frustration. San Asia muttered in obvious worry for her love interest. What seems to be the problem? Lord Phoenix drew the attention with his curious inquiry, but he himself could clearly see that something was wrong with the Haidu boy. Serziches hummed in thought, speaking his mind. Issei Haidu seems upset. Like when Riaz in her peerage, even most of us here, were seemingly afraid of him. He thoughtfully observed. That's it. All heads and pairs of eyes turned to look at the soul-fallen angel in the room, becoming increasingly worried at the horrified realization her expression sported as she was visible to everyone due to the fact that she was the only one standing. Without waiting for another question, Rainer spoke. Akei Nakasama told me this some time ago in secret. She gulped nervously before she continued her monologue. She told me that Ice-kun was very lonely when he was younger because of his unnatural strength and speed. Only a girl his age, nicknamed Rin by Ice-kun himself, was his sole friend, but that didn't last long. This Rin person and her parents moved to England a decade ago and, since then, Ice-kun has been by himself. I cannot see where this is going, Zeodicus muttered in curiosity. Shush. Venelana shushed him sharply with a matching glare. Wisely, the patriarch of the Gremory household kept his mouth shut. He never had other friends. Udo, the only one verified, dubbed as a friend by the brunette, came to the same horrified realization. Because everyone else was afraid of him. And we showed him that we were afraid of him right in front of his eyes. Akeno, not teaseful and playful for once, lost more color on her already almost white skin at her own realization. Riaz looked white as a ghost and totally aghast from what she and her peerage had caused without knowing, rendered speechless from their unintended actions. More specifically her own, since she was the king and, therefore, should have kept her composure and be the pillar of support for her cute servants. Instead, she caused more harm than she and her servants could have ever imagined to the one that she was smitten with, who was also fighting for her future. The future that she wanted to spend with him. Nevertheless, she determined herself to make amends and help her contracted magician out of the shell she saw him put himself in. The question was simple. How? How could she help someone that she barely knew when she couldn't completely help her peerage members with their problems, people she had known for years? The red-deeded girl shook her head to clear her doubts. She would trust in her gut to do whatever she could if anything else wouldn't work. Looking around, her heart almost shattered at how crestfallen her peerage, even Kaneko, looked. The same for Rainer. Only Sona and Tsubaki seemed relatively composed as far as the young people in the room were concerned. The adults only seemed a little troubled, mostly for the fact that such a young person, no matter if it was a boy or a girl, normal human or not, had to suffer from loneliness because they were different from their peers. They could only look in pity towards the brunette boy who was staring at Razor with an unnervingly emotionless face. When a light step was heard through the silent watchroom, all the youngsters couldn't contain the shivers that ran down their spines and the slightly scared looks at the fact that Issei had made a sound in the first place. Because, from what they had seen so far, the brunette made a sound when he was highly upset with something. Or, more accurately, someone. As for the adults and Ravel, who was the only young person in the room that hadn't seen Issei in this state, they felt a high amount of trepidation. Especially when the Sekiryuite ignited himself in flames once again. And, with feelings of resignation and worry, all the people in the watchroom could do was to watch as Issei's onslaught of unrelenting attacks began and pray to the dead original Mao that he wouldn't kill Razor by accident. Well, in Akeno's and Rainer's cases, there would also be the feeling of arousal, but nobody observed them enough to tell, even if they were blushing lightly in anticipation of the punishment the brunette was about to deliver. And the earlier display of power with his scale mail left them wanting for more. Fire Dragon Iron Fist. Issei spoke eerily calmly as he sent his flaming right fist on Razor's left jawline, hitting the mark without an ounce of resistance or a sign of even trying to defend from the blonde devil. Which was fine by the brunette, since that meant that he would finish this quickly. Razor was violently slammed on the dimensions barrier and couldn't even scream in pain as his regeneration kicked in to heal his shattered jaw. Crushing Fang. Razor gasped in silent agony as Issei's left knee met his stomach and caused him to lean forward involuntarily. Grip Strike. Issei used his entire left palm to catch his opponent's face before unleashing a violent explosion, the sound of which drew out Razor's agonized screams at his face, receiving so much damage in point-blank range. The result of that was that Razor was back on his feet even if he was smashed once again against a barrier. Swordhorn. A vicious headbutt on Razor's temple almost rendered the delirious from pain devil unconscious. Razor's demonic power was almost completely depleted because he used it subconsciously to regenerate the wounds he was receiving in rapid succession, but he knew that it would take a hit or two more to make him unable to use it again. Essentially, even as he received a roundhouse kick in the form of a talon on the right of his head and fell harshly to the hard uneven ground like a puppet with its strings cut, Razor wondered how this turned from an enjoyable fight to an utterly one-sided and humiliating beatdown on his expense from a person that he came to see as a rival, but quickly turned to a bloodthirsty beast. And he couldn't do anything to stop it. Oh, wait. He could. As another iron fist. Coming to the back of his head, Razor managed to stutter a phrase that saved him from further humiliation, as well as end the match once and for all. Sir, surrender. He couldn't stop himself from sounding horrified, but Razor couldn't care less for that. As long as he could stay alive and far away from this monster, he would even lick a fallen angel's barefoot to do so. The blonde devil was fortunate he forfeited because he was enveloped in an ethereal blue light that teleported him away. And Issei continued his attack until he met the ground, causing another explosion. Once he saw that his attack met the ground, instead of the head of his opponent, Issei stood imposingly on his feet, staring at the relatively deep crater he had caused with the same unnervingly emotionless expression as before. Uncaring for the possibility that he might have scarred Razor's mentality for life. Just then, Grafia announced the obvious outcome of the match with her usual stoic and professional voice, which was right as the brunette was surrounded by a blue light, indicating that he was being teleported out of the utterly destroyed dimension. Razor Phoenix Sama has surrendered. Issei Haidu wins the duel, and, therefore, Ria's Gremory Sama wins the rating game. The Sekiryuite appeared at the back of the watchroom with the same somewhat badass look he had when he was teleported out of the dimension. He didn't know what to expect, but looks of worry from most of the people in the room certainly wasn't it. He ignored them, though, as his eyes landed on a tall, male version of Ria's, wearing a very expensive-looking armor and staring right back at him with a small smile of satisfaction, yet the person's eyes couldn't hide their interest for him. The brunette remained silent as an awkward tension rose in the room. If he had paid any attention around, he would have seen Akeno's and Rainer's slightly hungry looks and slightly blushing faces due to how stimulated they felt from his brutality against Razor. As for Ria's, she refrained from tackling him out of sheer happiness that she was free because she couldn't act so immature in front of her family, as well as her now ex-fiancé's family, no matter how much she wanted to hold him all to herself. Sona, for her part, hadn't forgotten what Rainer told them, and her genius mind struggled to find anything to say that would make the obviously still upset brunette feel better. However, much to her inner frustration, she found nothing. In the end, it was Yudo who gathered his courage and broke the silence with his usual kind smile painted on his face. Congratulations on your victory, Ice-kun. Issei momentarily turned to him and gave him a curt nod of acknowledgement before he allowed his eyes to go to the adults in the room. Udo didn't show it, but he was saddened by his friend's reaction, as were most people around his age, because the brunette didn't even give them more than a glance. Undeterred by the awkwardness coming from the youngsters, Lord Phoenix came close to the brunette, getting his undivided attention. That said, the Sekiryuite was slightly surprised to see the patriarch of the family giving him a friendly smile, instead of being hostile. Lord Phoenix extended his right hand for a handshake, and he was pleased that the brunette completed the motion firmly, even if it was with obvious caution. Congratulations, Haidu-kun. That was a truly magnificent battle. Okay. Issei said awkwardly in confusion. Thanks, I guess. Lord Phoenix just laughed in amusement as he went back to his wife, who shared his sentiment with a dignified giggle behind her delicate left hand. Their daughter just humped in obviously fake indignation and turned her head to her right, with her nose pointing upwards. Her cute action caused Issei even more confusion since he saw the signs of a pink blush forming on her cheeks. He disregarded that, however, when the three teleported themselves back to their home. "Haidu-kun." Zeodicus Gremory called to him, getting his attention. The man was wearing a friendly smile as well when he approached the teen. "I believe that I speak for everyone that the battle we watched was more than enjoyable. Not only that, but your speech at the start was truly moving. Even these old bones of mine were affected by your words. So much so, that made me and my dear wife realize that we were too rash in our decision concerning our dear daughter's future," he said in emotional excitement. Understandably, Issei was visibly shocked by what he heard, if his widened eyes as he stared at the man in disbelief were any indication. The brunette's reaction made the women giggle in amusement, with Kaneko and Grafia simply smiling to show their emotions, while the men outright laughed with no regards for dignity due to their ranking, with Yudo being the only exception as he chuckled slowly. When his laughter died down, Zeodicus turned to his daughter, who seemed completely relaxed, which furthered his belief at what he said earlier. "Riaz-chan, me and your mother will wait for you and your peerage when summer break comes. And please," he glanced back at the brunette, his satisfied smile widening a bit before he turned back to his daughter. "Bring Haidu-kun as well. We would like to know him better." Riaz smiled beautifully at her father as she nodded in agreement. "Of course, Otu-sama." Unexpectedly, Venelana walked up to the brunette as well, making her daughter tense up. "Haidu Issei-kun, on behalf of the Gremory household, I hereby formally invite you to our home in the underworld at my daughter's earliest convenience." The Gremory matriarch formally requested a respectful bow. While dumbfounded at what was transpiring so far and his mind failing to keep up, Issei decided to go with the flow and bowed back as he answered with equal formality. "It would be my pleasure, Gremory-san." "Yufufufu." Venelana giggled behind her hand, knowing full well that her daughter was pleasantly surprised by his answer behind her. That said, she was internally caught off guard by his manners and the lack of embarrassment. In a good way. Such a well-mannered boy. Not only are you strong, but your parents raised you well. Now I see why Riaz-chan refused to marry Razor so adamantly. Her praises were genuine, but so was the teasing towards a certain someone. "Sama," said a certain someone pouting childishly, with an adorable red blush on her cheeks and an equally childish stomp of her foot, as if that would help her case. It didn't, as Venelana tittered an amused ufufufu giggle as she returned her attention to the brunette, ignoring everyone else's teasing laughter towards her daughter, coming mostly from her son Surziches, Akeno and, surprisingly, the fallen angel. Rainer. Much to her curiosity, though, the person she was initially speaking with was completely silent and didn't even seem as amused. In fact, his face was back in the same emotionless mask he had when he was teleported in the watchroom. Inwardly, she was disappointed that she didn't manage to lighten him up and forget whatever was going through his head when fighting Razor, but she had to leave with her husband. She had a grandson to attend to. "Until we meet again, Haidu Issei-kun," she said formally with a matching bow of her head before she returned to her spot beside her husband. But not before she bid a farewell from Issei in a matching formality. "Goodbye, for now, Gremory-san." "Goodbye, everyone. See most of you on my daughter's summer break." Zeodicus gave his own farewell with a friendly smile. Ria's parents received various goodbyes from the youngsters before vanishing in a transportation magic circle, which sported the Gremory crest and the familiar crimson glow that matched the hair of those in the family. Aside from Venelana, since she was married into the household. Not that this particular detail concerned Issei or that you readers didn't know about. The light mood didn't even stay for a second when it was only Issei, Surziches, Grafia and the rest of the teens in the room. The heavy awkwardness engulfed the room, one that left most of the youngsters fidgeting as they tried and failed to look Issei in the eyes. In his mind, this only confirmed Issei's assumption that the people he had grown close to were afraid of him and, therefore, he did the right thing to enclose his heart in a really tough shell. It was because of that his almost dead expression didn't change in the slightest. Similarly, Yudo and the girls were feeling awful at what they had caused to their friend and in some cases love interest without even trying. In a sense, they had betrayed his trust, especially in Yudo's, Asia's and Rainer's cases, with Ria's, Sona, Akeno and Kaneko following closely behind. Tsubaki felt bad about what had transpired as well, but didn't concern her enough to show it on her stoic expression. It displeased her that her king was feeling down about the whole situation and it frustrated her that she didn't know how to help her. And so, Surziches took it upon himself to try and defuse the heavy atmosphere as the highest-ranking devil and some people would disagree responsible adults in the room. "Haidu-kun." He called out casually with a friendly smile, pleased that he drew the teen's attention away from his little sister and the others. As my father said earlier, the battle was enjoyable, to say the least. Your speech was also beyond touching and, to tell you the truth, as the one that holds the title of Lucifer, I totally agree with your point of view. And, since you won and freed my little sister from the fate of a loveless marriage, I will happily comply with your request and denounce arranged marriages for our race. The Mayu's casual yet happy announcement statement caught Riaz and the others off guard, but Sona was the only one that caught on quickly what her childhood friend's brother was implying. So you say that you didn't agree with the marriage, but you couldn't do anything due to your position as Lucifer? Issei asked emotionlessly, catching everyone off guard. Even Surzich's. Why, yes. He admitted easily, pleasantly surprised by the boy's intellect. A somewhat conflicted frown appeared on Issei's face, which easily drew the attention. And, as if he read him like an open book, Surzich's responded to the unasked question. Do not try to understand politics, Issei-kun. Especially from our race. It's too complicated for someone so young to understand, since you aren't an heir to a household. Nonetheless, I can tell you that, even as the most powerful devil in the underworld and the highest ranking one, I cannot show favoritism towards a household. Otherwise, I will lose face and my influence will take a huge dive that will be extremely difficult, if not outright impossible to reverse. While a little vague, the explanation was enough to sate Issei's curiosity as to why the Mayu didn't interfere personally with his little sister's problem. He nodded in understanding and left it at that. As for Riaz, she was beyond surprised that her brother didn't want this marriage to happen, and because of her own frustration over the matter, she had forgotten about the whole politics matter. She felt ashamed that, for a time, she thought that her brother was against her wishes. Also, the younger Riteed felt the need to fathom at her stupidity. After all, her brother and sister-in-law were one of the very few couples that got married because of love. That said, Surzich's assumption that his influence would take a huge dive was partially correct. Not all noble households were so into arranged marriages. And after the brunette boy's inspiring speech that Surzich's had committed in his memory to use when the time would come, the Mayu hoped that all households would readily agree with the wish she shared with the Sekirute. Haidu Issei-sama. Surprisingly, it was Grafia that broke the contemplative silence that had befallen the room. The brunette just looked at her in confusion as she approached with a small, gentle smile on her lips. And, now that he thought about it, she called out to him in a kind tone, rather than the one he was used to. The strongest queen in the underworld stopped 2 meters away from him and to his right, forcing him to turn to face her, in order for everyone else to have a clear vision of both of them. Kind silver eyes met dull, emotionless, yet slightly interested dark green ones. Today, you won more than just a match. You earned the respect of 2 households, mine and my husband's. She paused as Surzich's chuckled lightheartedly, that's true. In the background. Also, she didn't know it, but she confirmed Issei's deduction that she and Surzich's were a couple. So, she bowed respectfully. Thank you for saving my sister-in-law from a loveless marriage. She raised her head to meet his now somewhat surprised eyes at her previous action, making her smile widen a little. Also, the selflessness you showed by wasting your wish for a request such as the one you performed is truly remarkable. Especially since you are so young in age and a human, no less. It speaks volumes of how your parents raised you. I'm sure that, had they been present, they would be more than proud of your accomplishments. Her high praise shocked the brunette greatly, to the point that he almost smiled. Especially since he wasn't on the best of terms with the maid the last time they met. Nonetheless, he was grateful. Thank you for your kind words, Grafia-san. Even if his tone was emotionless, it was obvious he was sincere in his words, complete with a bow of his head. In the background, even the usually stoic trio Kaneko, Sona and Tsubaki wore warm smiles at what they were seeing. Surzich's and Riaz were the most pleasantly surprised by this development, but didn't say anything in case they ruined the moment. Asia was even sniffling, touched by the scene before her. Pleased with how this was going, Grafia took her chance to make amends for her behavior towards him in the not-so-distant past. Would you mind to hear a request of mine, Haidu Issei-sama? I'm listening. From the way he responded, it couldn't have been more obvious how cautious he was. Undeterred from that fact, Grafia spoke. I will not try to play the expert, but I believe that there has been a misunderstanding between you and most of the people that are watching us right now. You should talk to each other to clear up any misunderstandings that may have happened. She suggested kindly. Issei narrowed his eyes in suspicion as he turned to look at the group of teens. They narrowed even more when they landed on a visibly shaking Rainer, who was smiling extremely awkwardly. His sharp mind easily came to the conclusion that his mother had talked to her and, in turn, she shared something with everyone in the room. Which, in hindsight, explained the heavily awkward atmosphere he met once he appeared in the room. Also, the subtle awkward glances he detected from the others towards him and Rainer all but confirmed his assumption. As he returned his attention to the still kindly smiling Grafia, he breathed out a resigned, defeated sigh before he spoke emotionlessly, albeit honestly. It's not something that I'd like to do, from what I saw earlier during the rating game." He paused for dramatic effect, noting with inner amusement that the others were anticipating his response with bated breaths. "But I guess I can give a chance for a talk." He finished with a barest hint of his lips twitching upwards in a hidden smirk, albeit his tone didn't change in the slightest. Also, he didn't say it, or show it for that matter, but he was genuinely afraid of that talk, whenever it would come. Both him and Grafia ignored the relieved sighs from most of the group as her genuinely kind smile widened even more. "That is all I can ask for. Consider it a thank you for your kind words, Grafia-san." Issei responded in a somewhat softer tone, indicating that any bad blood between the two of them was all in the past. Again, Grafia was pleased with this development as she took the hidden message and nodded at him in acknowledgement before she returned to her husband's side. "Before you talk to each other," Serziches took the stage, so to speak, with his calm, charismatic voice. "You should give some time to gather your thoughts properly," he advised wisely. "You're young, teenagers at that, and you're prone to mistakes and hurtful words that you wouldn't do or say in normal circumstances. Clear your minds first and don't let your emotions get the best of you. That's all I'm saying." Even Issei seemed contemplative at that and, after giving a brief thought, he came to the conclusion that the Mao was right. And, like everyone else, he gave a nod of agreement to his suggestion and advice. "Good." Serziches smiled in satisfaction before he spoke to his wife. "Shall we go, Grafia?" "Yes, Serziches-sama." Grafia returned to being stoic and professional as she addressed her king. "You have to return to your duties and paperwork." Issei couldn't help but cringe at the thought of a desk full of papers and felt pity for the Mao, while the others looked either amused or, in Ria's and Sona's cases, shared his sentiment. Serziches felt like crying in tears as he bid his farewell and disappeared through a magic transportation circle that bore the Gremory crest in crimson glow, along with Grafia. Something that left the group of teenagers alone and in another awkward silence. Although, this time, it wasn't as heavy as before. Which was broken by Issei when a sudden thought entered his mind and decided to voice it. "Oi, Rias." Rias blinked in surprise that he addressed her. Especially without a suffix, considering everything that had happened that night. Nonetheless, she was giddy and had a hard time hiding it. "Why yes Ice." Everybody was confused by the brunettes' suddenly troubled look. "Will your brother show the footage of the rating to the entire underworld?" This genuinely concerned question caught everyone off guard, but Rias answered as honestly as she could. I don't think so, Ice. This was a private matter and an unofficial rating game, so I don't believe Ani-sama will allow such a thing. Serziches, would you show the footage of the rating to the underworld? At Grafia's sudden question, the Maya momentarily paused from his paperwork that he was immediately forced to attend to and had a few moments to genuinely think about it. No. He shook his head after his decision, turned to look at his wife, and gave a thorough explanation of her inquisitive look in a serious tone. Until Issei-kun becomes known to the underworld and, most importantly, the elders, nobody can know about him and his incredibly powerful abilities. Even if he's an ally and my sister's contracted magician, some people won't see it that way and may consider him a threat. It's best that Issei-kun gains the trust and respect from the elders, like he did with us, my family and the Phoenix clan, than introduce him prematurely. Even then, Rias has to show signs of growth to appease the elders that she has control over such a powerful individual, which is why Gasper is still sealed. Until the summer break, which is when my sister will learn about our plan for the rating games between the rising youths, Issei-kun has to remain a secret from the underworld. Grafia hummed in thought at the small exposition, but ultimately agreed with her husband. Then, what about the other three Mao and Tiamat, the Chaos Karma Dragon? She asked curiously. Tiamat is a horrible idea, considering her hate towards the Red Dragon Emperor. Serziches shot down that option in an almost deadpan manner. Seraphol, Ajuka and Falbium, however, are another story. He hummed in thought. Maybe I can show Ajuka and Seraphol, since the two of them will undoubtedly be interested in Issei-kun and can keep a secret. Falbium, though, I don't know. I guess he'll be too lazy to watch the footage. He lightly joked at the end of his explanation, which drew a minuscule giggle from the maid. With that, they both returned to what they were doing, completely unaware that the Mao had confirmed his sister's assumption. Even if partially. That's good. Issei sighed in relief and felt like a burden was lifted from his shoulders. Akeno giggled melodically, drawing the attention. Is Ice-kun getting embarrassed at the thought of being exposed to the UNDERWORLD, she asked teasingly. Issei ignored the sexual innuendo and answered in a deadpan, albeit absolutely serious. No. I don't want the devils to know about me yet. It's too early. I agree. Sona interjected in her usual tone as she stepped forward, inwardly cursing her petite stature compared to her childhood friend and even her sister. The elders from the council are known for their distrust and will try to dispose of Haidu-kun or try to find a way to control him. She briefly explained. Issei blinked in surprise that the SCP came to his defense but didn't say or do anything else. Another awkward moment passed before the brunette once again broke by speaking. Look. Issei sighed tiredly in exasperation at the atmosphere. Let's all go get some rest. We don't need to force ourselves to get along, okay? He suggested tiredly. Rhea sighed in defeat, indicating that she agreed with him. However, before she could say anything, she saw Rainer confidently walking towards her contracted magician, with Asia following timidly. The fallen angel woman made a few girls fume with jealousy as she took Issei's left arm and held it between her clothed breasts. Then, let's go home, Ice Kun, she declared lovingly, ignoring the glare she received. Asia blushed profusely as she did the same to his right arm and boldly said. I won't lose to Rainer-san. Well, she tried to be bold. Her cute pout and stuttering destroyed that effort. Nonetheless, it didn't mean that some girls became less jealous. Especially since Rainer tittered in amusement. Issei could only sigh in defeat at his predicament since he didn't want to make things even more difficult. As he and the girls left, with Rainer and Asia bickering the entire way, he could have sworn that Yudo was laughing at him. And as everyone went their separate ways, with Rhea's going to the Orc and the rest of her peerage towards their apartments for the night, the Redeed was fuming that she wasn't as close to her contracted magician as her bishop and the fallen angel girl. Alas, Rhea's decided that she would force her way towards Issei's heart as soon as possible, since she didn't like to lose to anyone. She stopped pacing in front of her desk as an epiphany hit her, making her smirk triumphantly. What better timing than when he's asleep? This is the end of the video. If you enjoyed the story, then hit the like button and comment your favorite part, but for now see you all in the next video.